She had not slept in 2 days. Not because she was afraid. Fear was a luxury she had stopped allowing herself 3 years ago. Around the same time she stopped using her real name. Sleep was simply a risk she could not afford right now, not with the claiming moon 7 days away, and the road out of Valehaven still wet with morning frost that crunched under her boots every time she shifted her weight near the window. Mara. She went by Mara now, had gone by it so long that her tongue had nearly forgotten the shape of the other name, stood at the edge of her workbench and counted her supplies. Dried elder root, enough for 6 more weeks of scent masking. River salt, half a jar, which was not enough but would have to be. A blade she had bought from a traveling merchant 11 months ago, and had practiced with every single night in the dark behind the shed, not because she expected to fight anyone, but because a person who expected to run should at least know how to run holding something sharp. Outside, Valehaven was waking up. She could hear it through the thin walls of the cottage she rented from an old woman named Edith, who asked no questions and accepted payment in dried herbs and preserved fruit. The settlement was small enough that its sounds were familiar, the baker down the hill starting his oven, which always made a low hum that traveled through the ground. The 2 children who belonged to the miller's family, already chasing each other between the market stalls even though the stalls were not yet open. The steady knock of someone chopping wood near the eastern wall, the sound patient and rhythmic and oddly calming. She had loved this place, briefly. That was the dangerous thing about staying somewhere too long. You started to love it. You started to learn people's names and remember their schedules, and feel the specific pull of a life that wasn't yours but had started to fit around you like a borrowed coat you wore every day. She knew the baker's name was Leonard and that he hummed old songs while he worked. She knew the miller's children were called Pip and Clara, and that Pip was braver than his sister, but Clara was smarter than anyone gave her credit for. She knew Edith took her tea without anything in it, just plain and hot, and that she sat by her window every evening and watched the road the way people watch roads when they are expecting someone who stopped coming a long time ago. Mara knew all of this, and it was a problem. She turned away from the window and went back to her packing. The bag had to be light. She had made that mistake once before, in the first settlement she had ever fled, 2 weeks after she left her family's hiding place at the age of 17. She had packed too much then, weighed herself down with things that felt essential in the moment. An extra pair of boots, a heavy cloak, 3 books she thought she couldn't survive without. She had abandoned all of it by the second day. You could not run with the weight of everything you loved on your back. You learned that quickly. So now she packed differently. 1 change of clothes, dark colors, nothing that caught light. The elder root, the river salt, the blade, a small tin of preserved meat she had put away last autumn, specifically for a moment like this. Flint and a short candle, a folded piece of oilskin to keep things dry if the weather turned. She also packed a single small object that was not practical at all, a narrow strip of cloth with symbols on it, the kind of marks her mother used to press into wax before sealing letters. She had carried it for 3 years without understanding what it meant, and she had never been able to make herself leave it behind. She tucked it into the innermost pocket of the bag and pressed the flap down over it. 7 days. That was how much time she had before the claiming moon rose full and the hunt began. Every year when the moon came, the Alpha King sent his runners into all corners of the kingdom to find the one his instinct pointed toward, his fated mate, the pack called it, the one the moon itself had chosen for him. Most wolves looked forward to the season. It was a celebration, full of fire and music and the kind of wild joy that came from a community releasing the tension of an entire year in a single enormous exhale. Families dressed their daughters in their best. Young women braided their hair with silver thread. Boys who were old enough carved their marks into the trees near the border roads in hopes that the king's runners would see them and carry the news back. Mara had watched it from a distance for 2 years, from different settlements, always hidden, always counting the days until it was over and the road was safe again. The 3rd year she had not planned to stay in Valehaven long enough for it to matter. She had meant to move on in early spring. Then spring came and Edith's roof needed fixing and Leonard the baker's apprentice broke his arm, and someone needed to run the herb counter at the market, and before she knew what had happened, it was summer, and then the first breath of autumn, and now it was 7 days before the moon, and she was still here. Still here with a bag that was almost packed and a life she had almost allowed herself to have. She tied the top of the bag and stood up straight. A knock at the door. Her hand moved to the blade before the sound had finished. She stood very still. The knock came again, lighter this time, the way someone knocks when they are trying not to alarm you. "It is Edith," the old woman's voice came through the wood. "I saw your light last night at a time when lights should not be on. I made tea." Mara let her hand fall away from the blade. She went to the door and opened it. Edith was smaller than the sound of her suggested. She was perhaps 70, perhaps older. With white hair she kept braided over one shoulder, and a face that had the particular quality of old faces that have spent a long time outdoors. Permanently weathered, permanently calm. She was holding 2 cups of tea, one in each hand, and she was looking at the bag on the floor, with the expression of someone who has seen a bag like that before. "Come in," Mara said. Edith came in. She set 1 cup on the workbench and kept the other for herself, and did not sit down. "You are leaving," Edith said. It was not a question. "I was planning to move on before winter. The moon rises in 7 days." Mara said nothing. Edith looked at her for a long moment, then looked at the bag, then looked back at her. "I have seen the king's runners twice in my life," she said. "Both times they came through this valley. Both times I thought they were looking for someone, and both times the person they were looking for was not here, and so they moved on. But I am old enough to know what a person looks like when they are not waiting to be found. And you," she said quietly, "have looked like that since the day you arrived." Mara picked up the cup of tea. She drank some of it. "I appreciate the cottage," she said, "and your kindness. You can rent the room to someone else starting the week after next." Edith was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "There is a traveler at Leonard's place. Came in last night. He had been walking for a long time by the look of him, and he was asking questions." Mara set the cup down. "What kind of questions?" "The kind someone asks when they already know the answers but want to see how you react to being asked." Edith turned the cup in her hands. "He asked Leonard if there were any women in the settlement who lived alone. He asked if there were any newcomers in the last 3 years. He asked if anyone in the area worked with herbs." She paused. "Leonard told him yes to all 3. He does not know how to lie. It has never been necessary here before." Mara was already pulling the bag over her shoulder. "He also asked," Edith continued, very carefully, "if anyone in the settlement had eyes the color of old silver, the kind of color you do not often see." Mara stopped. She had her mother's eyes. She had always had her mother's eyes. It was the one thing the alchemy could not change. The scent could be masked, the mark could be hidden, but the color of her eyes was simply what it was. A pale, clear gray that caught light the way still water did, that people sometimes stared at for a beat too long without meaning to. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Still at Leonard's, last I checked. That was 20 minutes ago." 20 minutes. Leonard's bakery was at the center of the settlement. If she went out the front, she would pass within 100 feet of it. If she went through Edith's garden and over the east fence, she could reach the tree line without crossing the main road. "I need to go now," Mara said. "I know," Edith said. She put her cup down and reached into the pocket of her wrap and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "This is the name of a road. It will take you north. There is a village 3 days' walk from here called Fenwick that does not appear on any of the kingdom's official maps. The people there keep to themselves. They do not answer questions." She held the paper out. Mara took it. She looked at it. Then she looked up at Edith. "Why are you helping me?" Edith was quiet for just a moment. "Because I know what it is to be a woman who cannot stay where she wants to stay," she said. "And because you fixed my roof without being asked. And you checked on me every morning this winter when the cold was bad. And because whatever it is you are running from, you do not have the face of someone who deserves it." Mara folded the paper and pressed it into the pocket of her coat. She would not use the road to Fenwick. Fenwick was 3 days north, and 3 days was too long on an open road if the king's runner had already been asking questions for 20 minutes. She had another destination in mind, had always had it in the back of her mind as a last option. The place she had heard about from a wandering trader who passed through Valehaven 8 months ago. A half-drunk man with a story that was too strange to be invented. She had listened to every word he said, and then pretended she hadn't. She went to the door. "Mara," Edith said. She turned. Edith was looking at her with something that was not quite pity and not quite love, but was somewhere between the two. The way very old people sometimes looked at very young people when they could see the road ahead more clearly than the one walking it. "Take care of those eyes," the old woman said quietly. "They are the kind that are hard to forget." Mara went out through the garden. She went over the east fence in one smooth movement, landing on the other side without a sound. The frost on the grass caught the early morning light and turned it into something almost beautiful. She did not stop to look at it. She crossed the edge of the meadow behind Edith's property, at a pace that was fast enough to cover ground, but not so fast that anyone watching from the settlement would see a person running and think something was wrong. A running person attracted attention. A person moving with intention attracted nothing. She reached the first line of trees. She went into them. The wren forest began gently here at the south edge. Just birch and ash spaced wide enough apart that morning light came through in long pale bars. The ground under the trees was softer than the meadow, a layer of old leaves that silenced her footsteps almost entirely. She had walked this edge of the forest many times in the past year, always in the early mornings when the settlement was quiet, always for the same reason. She had been mapping her escape route so thoroughly that by the time she needed it, it would feel like something she had done before. And it did. It felt exactly like something she had done before. She moved north-northwest. The light changed as the trees thickened, going from pale gold to a deeper, greener shade. She kept the rising sun at her right shoulder, which put her on the correct bearing. She had done this enough times to know that if she maintained this direction for 2 hours, she would reach the part of the forest where the old road had once run. The road that no one used anymore because the bridge it had led to had collapsed 40 years ago, and no one had seen any reason to rebuild it. But the road was still there, overgrown and quiet, and it ran in exactly the right direction. She had been walking for perhaps 40 minutes when she heard it. It was not a sound she could name immediately. It was low, and it was far away, and it was moving. She stopped. She tilted her head and listened the way she had learned to listen, without breathing, without moving, without letting any sound of her own cover the thing she was trying to hear. A howl. Long, single-toned, the kind of sound that rolled over distance and still arrived with its full meaning intact. She had heard howls before. She had lived near enough to wolf settlements that they were not entirely unfamiliar. The calls the pack made to each other across distances, the quick sharp ones that meant come here and the longer ones that meant all clear. She knew the general language of them, roughly, the way someone who lived near a river eventually learned to read the water's sound without knowing exactly why. This one was not any of those. This one was a hunt call. Not the claiming moon hunt, that did not begin for 7 days. This was something else. This was the sound of a hunt that was already in progress, already moving, and the direction of it was not away from her. The direction of it was toward the settlement she had just left. She stood for one more second in the trees, listening to the way the howl faded and then rose again, slightly closer. Then she stopped listening and started moving. She moved faster now, not quite running but close to it, keeping the trees between herself and whatever was behind her. The bag was light enough that it didn't pull at her shoulders. The blade was within reach. The elder root in the bag was releasing the faintest trace of its scent. She had crushed some of it while packing, which meant her masking was stronger right now than it usually was, which was either very good timing or very good luck, and she did not believe in luck. The old road appeared ahead of her, exactly where she had expected it to be, a strip of ground where the trees grew on either side but not through the middle, where the earth was compacted from decades of cartwheels and boot soles, covered now in a thick mat of moss and creeping vine. She stepped onto it and turned north. She thought about Edith. She thought about Leonard, who did not know how to lie, and had answered every question honestly without understanding what any of them meant. She thought about Pip and Clara and the way Clara had once shown her a flower she found near the market, and asked Mara what it was called, and Mara had known, had told her, and Clara had repeated the name carefully like she was learning a new word in a language she planned to become fluent in. She let herself think about them for exactly the length of time it took to walk the first quarter mile of the old road. Then she stopped thinking about them and thought only about the path ahead. There was a place 3 days' journey from here that did not appear on any kingdom map, that was not a village and not a settlement but a location, a geographic feature that the locals called a curse, and that the wandering trader had described as a place where the very air tasted like the inside of a waterfall. He had said it in the way people describe things they have seen once and never fully recovered from. He had said the mist that surrounded it was so thick and so strange that it made your nose go blank. Not stuffed, not blocked, just blank. Like that sense simply wasn't there anymore. Like you had always lived without it. For most people, he said, that was terrifying. For Mara, it sounded like the first safe breath she had taken in 3 years. The Veyrath Falls. That was the name. The Veyrath Falls at the northern end of the Wren Forest, beyond the point where any reasonable person would follow any trail, in a basin of mist and moving water that the entire kingdom had decided was not worth the trouble of investigating. She had memorized everything the trader said about it, every detail, the way it sat between 2 ridges, the way the sound of the water was the first thing you heard long before you could see anything, the way the ground changed from soft forest floor to smooth flat stone as you approached. She had memorized it the way you memorize an exit in a room you haven't entered yet, just in case. Just in case was now. She walked. Behind her, distant but not distant enough, a second howl answered the first. She did not run. Running would come later, when the trees thinned and she needed to cover open ground. Right now, the trees were her allies and noise was her enemy. She moved through the Wren Forest the way water moves through rock, not fighting anything, not making more sound than necessary, finding the path of least resistance and staying on it. The sun climbed higher. The howls did not come again. That did not reassure her. The ones who were good at this, she knew, stopped making noise when they got close. The announcement came from far away. The silence came when they were near. She kept moving. The old road bent gently northeast and she followed it, stepping over a fallen branch, ducking under a low arc of thorn vine, keeping her breathing even and steady. 7 days until the moon. Less than 1 day since she had last slept. She had done worse. She had once gone 4 days without proper rest on the road between the Veldon Hills and the coast, and she had arrived wherever she was going upright and functional, even if she had then slept for 18 hours without moving. She could sleep when she was behind the falls. If she made it behind the falls, if it was what the trader said it was, if the mist worked the way he described, if. There were too many ifs, but ifs were the only currency available, so she spent them carefully. She kept moving. The forest around her went on, green and quiet, the light shifting overhead as the morning wore into midday. Once she stopped and ate a small amount of the preserved meat and drank from a stream she crossed, checking upstream and downstream before she crouched at the water's edge. Once she stopped to listen for 3 full minutes when she thought she heard something moving parallel to her in the trees, but it turned out to be a deer. She saw it between the birches, a young one, ears up, watching her with enormous calm eyes before it turned and walked away without hurrying. She envied it. The afternoon wore on. By the time the light started to go gold and long through the trees, she had covered more ground than she had expected. The old road had been good to her, flatter and more direct than the open terrain would have been. She estimated she was somewhere past the midpoint of the Wren Forest. The trees here were older, bigger, the kind that had been growing for a century or more, and had the broad, quiet confidence of things that had outlasted every difficult season they had ever faced. She found a place to stop for the night at the base of one of the oldest oaks, a space between 2 massive roots that formed a natural hollow, sheltered on 3 sides, with a clear view of the path she had come down. She did not light the candle. She ate a little more, drank from her water bottle, and sat with her back against the bark of the oak and the blade across her knees. She meant to rest for a few hours, to keep watch. Her eyes closed before she meant them to. The forest breathed around her, slow and enormous, full of sounds that were only themselves and nothing more. And for a few hours, in the hollow between the roots of an ancient tree, Mara slept. She dreamed of the strip of cloth in her bag, the one with her mother's marks on it. In the dream it was unfolded and she could read it, and what it said was her real name, written over and over, in her mother's hand, the way you write something that you are afraid will be forgotten. She woke before dawn with that feeling still in her chest, like something pressing from the inside, and she stood up and adjusted the bag on her shoulder and walked on into the dark. The dream stayed with her longer than dreams usually did. Most dreams faded the moment she opened her eyes, dissolving the way frost dissolved when the sun touched it, gone before she could hold on to any part of it. This one did not fade. It sat in her chest the way the cold sat in old stone walls, deep and slow and patient, still there long after the surface had warmed. She walked in the pre-dawn dark with her mother's handwriting still visible behind her eyes, the marks on that strip of cloth, the name written over and over. She had not said her real name aloud in 3 years. She was not going to say it now. The forest was different before dawn. The sounds changed. The birds that sang in the daytime were quiet, replaced by the occasional call of an owl, the soft rustling of small things moving through the undergrowth with the particular unhurried confidence of animals that owned the dark. The darkness itself was not complete. A thin gray light came from somewhere above the canopy, the sky beginning to decide whether it would be a clear day or a cloudy one, not yet committed either way. She moved quickly. The elder root in her bag was still releasing its cover scent and she tucked her collar up around the back of her neck, a habit she had developed. The scent glands that could give her away most easily were concentrated at the neck and wrists, and keeping them covered reduced the surface area of the risk, even slightly. She had gone perhaps 2 miles when the old road simply ended. Not dramatically, no sign, no broken gate, no marker of any kind. The road just stopped, the compacted earth petering out into ordinary forest floor, the moss and vine reclaiming it so gradually that you could not have said exactly where the road ended and the forest began. She stopped and looked at it for a moment. She had known this was coming. The trader had told her the road ended somewhere in the deep forest, that after that you were navigating by landscape, not by path. He had said, when the road ends, find the ridge. Follow the ridge north. The water will find you before you find it. She turned and looked for the ridge. It took her a few minutes, but she found it. A long, gradual rise to the west that was not dramatic enough to call a hill, but was consistent enough to call a ridge. She angled toward it and started climbing, careful on the leaf-wet slope, finding her footholds one at a time. At the top of the ridge, she stopped. She could see farther from here. The canopy dropped away slightly, and in the gray pre-dawn light she could make out the shape of the land ahead, the way it fell into a valley, and then rose again. Two ridges running roughly parallel with a gap between them. That gap was where the sound was coming from. She could not hear the falls yet, but she could hear something, a low breath at the edge of her perception, something that wasn't wind and wasn't animal, and wasn't the forest itself, but was the feeling of a lot of water moving somewhere not too far away. She started down the far side of the ridge. That was when she noticed the second thing. She had been aware of a vague unease since early morning, a sense of something pressing at the edge of her attention that she had been attributing to tiredness and the residue of the dream. But it was not tiredness. She realized that now, stopping on the slope and holding very still. It was something she had felt once before, years ago, on a road between two places she no longer remembered the names of, the specific sensation of being observed by something that was not visible. She turned slowly and looked behind her. Nothing, just trees, gray and still in the pre-dawn light, every one of them exactly where a tree should be. She turned back and kept moving, but the feeling stayed. She was deep into the valley between the ridges when the light changed to something that could properly be called morning, and it was in that new light that she found the thing that stopped her entirely. It was a body. Not dead. The man was sitting with his back against a tree at the edge of a small clearing, his legs stretched out in front of him, his head fallen forward onto his chest. He was breathing. She could see the slow rise and fall of his shoulders from 15 feet away. He was perhaps 50 years old, perhaps older, wearing the kind of clothing that had once been good and had been walked in for a very long time since. A traveler, or what remained of one. She should have gone around him. She knew that. She knew it the way she knew every other safety rule she had written for herself over 3 years of keeping herself alive on roads that didn't want her on them. Do not stop for strangers. Do not draw attention. Do not slow down for anything that isn't a direct threat to your path. She went to him. She crouched down a few feet away from him and said quietly, "Hey." He startled awake so violently that he knocked the back of his head against the tree behind him and swore very quietly in a voice that had the rasp of someone who had not drunk water recently. His eyes found her and he blinked. They were brown and tired and, once the startlement faded, not unkind. "I thought I was still dreaming," he said. "You are not," she said. "Are you hurt?" He considered this carefully, the way people do when they are unsure of the answer. He tested his hands and his feet and moved his neck and then said, "Not in any way that isn't my own fault. I have been walking since yesterday at noon, and I sat down at some point, and that was, when did you say it was? Early morning." He closed his eyes briefly. 6 hours then. Or 7. He opened his eyes again. "I am looking for the falls." She said nothing. He looked at her, with the expression of a man who understood that he had just said something he perhaps should not have said to a stranger. "I have been told," he said, carefully now, "that the mist around the falls makes it impossible to track anyone who goes in. I have been told that specifically by 3 different people, and each of those people told me not to mention it to anyone. And here I have gone and said it to the first person I have met in the Wren Forest in 2 days. He rubbed his face. "My name is Owen. I am, as you can probably see, not very good at this." "Not very good at what?" "Running away." She sat back on her heels. Owen looked at her, waiting, with the expression of a man who had given out his name and was waiting to see if anything came back. "Mara," she said. "Are you going to the falls?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What are you running from?" His face changed, not dramatically. He did not look away or tense his jaw or do any of the obvious things people did when they didn't want to answer a question. He simply looked tired in a new way, a deeper way. "The moon," he said. "Same as you, I would imagine, except not quite." He paused. "I have a daughter. She is 16. Her mother was a wolf, full blood, which means my daughter is half. She has the mark. Not strongly. The pack elders said so when she was born, said she would never be strong enough to be of interest to anyone who mattered. But they were wrong, apparently. A runner came to our village 2 months ago. He looked at her for too long. He left without saying anything, but the look was, it was the kind of look that means someone is going to come back." Mara was quiet. "I sent her north first," Owen said. 3 weeks ago. Then I followed to make sure she got to where she was going. But on the road I heard things. Things about the moon hunt this year being different, more thorough than usual, more runners, more territory covered. He looked down at his hands, and I heard things about the Silver Covenant. Everything in her went very still. She kept her face exactly as it was. People say it died in the war, Owen continued, not looking at her now, looking at his hands. The war was 30 years ago. Most people who remember it are old enough that they've stopped talking about it. But there is a man in the village 3 days east of here, a scholar sort of, keeps old records, and he told me something that I cannot stop thinking about. He said the Covenant bloodline did not die. He said it was hidden. He said the descendants of the Covenant carry a mark that is invisible to every wolf alive, except for one. The morning light was coming stronger now, finding its way through the canopy in pale gold slivers. A bird somewhere above them started singing, clear and bright, unconcerned with any of what was being said below it. "The Alpha King," Mara said. Her voice came out even. She had trained it to come out even. Owen looked up at her. His tired brown eyes moved across her face with a careful quietness. "The scholar also said," he continued, "that the Covenant descendants have a specific physical trait that cannot be changed by any means. The scent can be altered, the mark can be suppressed, but the eyes—" "Owen," she said. He stopped. "How long have you been in this forest?" 2 days. "And you said 3 different people told you about the falls." "Yes." "Where did you speak to those people?" "The first 2 on the East Road, about a day's walk from Valehaven. The third was in the forest itself, a woman traveling alone. She knew this forest well. She told me about the mist, the scent disruption. She said that if someone needed to disappear completely, the falls were the only place in the kingdom where it was actually possible." He paused. She seemed very sure of it. She also seemed like she was in a hurry and did not want to stay and talk very long. "What did she look like?" He described her, old white hair braided over one shoulder, the look of someone who spent time outdoors. Edith. Edith, who had given Mara a paper with the road to Fenwick on it and then, apparently, had gone directly to the East Road and started pointing people toward the falls. Mara sat with that for a moment. The specific quality of kindness that operated at that level of quiet efficiency, that did not announce itself, that simply moved pieces into place and then went home and made tea. She stood up. "Can you walk?" she asked Owen. He got to his feet somewhat painfully, testing his legs, finding them usable. "Yes." Slowly, but yes. "We go together," she said. "Slowly is fine. We have time." She looked at the sky through the canopy. "How far east is your daughter's destination?" "Far enough that she should be there by now." He brushed bark dust from his coat. "She is faster than me. She is faster than most people. Then she is safe." "Probably. Probably is what we have," she said. "Come on." She turned north and started walking. He fell into step beside her, a little unsteadily at first and then more steadily, as his legs remembered what they were supposed to do. He was taller than her by nearly a head, and his walking stride was naturally longer, but he shortened it without being asked, which she noted. They walked in silence for a while. Then Owen said, "The scholar also said that the Covenant bloodline is why the war was fought." She kept walking. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "Or I have heard something like it," she said. "Careful, careful," keeping her voice the neutral tone of someone reporting information rather than protecting it. "I have heard different versions of the story from different people. The versions do not agree on much." "What do they agree on?" She thought about it. That the Covenant existed. That it was very old, older than the current kingdom. That it was destroyed in the war. And that the thing the Covenant was built to do was never finished. What was it built to do? She didn't answer that. Not because she didn't have an answer. She had an answer, or part of one. A fragment she had been carrying for so long that she had stopped examining it. The way you stopped looking closely at the thing you were most afraid of. It lived in the strip of cloth with her mother's marks on it, in the symbols she had been unable to read, in the pieces of the story that she had picked up in bits and fragments from travelers and old texts and the few elders she had been able to talk to who remembered the time before the war. She had a piece of it. She suspected she did not have nearly enough. "We should keep moving," she said. They kept moving. The forest deepened as the morning stretched into afternoon. Owen was a good companion for walking. He did not fill silence with unnecessary noise, and when he did speak, it was with the directness of a man who had been thinking something through before he said it. He told her about his daughter without being asked more. Her name was Clara, which made something catch in Mara's chest for reasons she chose not to examine, and she had been born in a village on the north coast and had never much wanted to be anywhere that was not near water. He talked about her the way parents talked about children they were proud of and worried about simultaneously. the two feelings so tangled together that they came out as a single sound. In return, Mara told him nothing personal. She told him about the route they were taking, what she knew about the terrain ahead, what the trader had said about the mist and the scent disruption. She told him practical things, useful things, things that would help him navigate and make decisions. She did not tell him who she was. She did not tell him what she was running from, beyond the general category of the moon hunt that both of them had already admitted to. She did not tell him about the marks on the strip of cloth, or the dream, or the name that she had not said aloud in 3 years. He did not push. That, she thought, was either wisdom or exhaustion, possibly both. They stopped twice, once to refill water from a fast-running stream that came from the direction they were heading, which meant they were on the right track toward the source, and once because Owen's left boot had developed a problem that needed immediate attention, or it would become a much bigger problem in another mile. She waited while he fixed it, crouched at the base of a tree, watching the way the light moved through the leaves. It was during this second stop that the feeling came back. The one she had felt in the early morning. The sense of observation, of something watching from a distance that was too large to see clearly. She turned slowly and looked back along the way they had come. Trees, light, the ordinary ongoing life of the forest, birds and wind and small rustlings. Nothing. But the feeling did not go away. Owen looked up from his boot. He had seen her turn. He said nothing, but his expression asked the question. "We should move faster," she said. "How much faster?" She looked at him, calculating. He was capable of more than he was currently giving. He was tired, but not spent. "Faster than we have been," she said. "Can you do that?" "Tell me what you heard and I will do whatever you need," he said. "I didn't hear anything," she said honestly. "I felt something. I have learned to trust what I feel." He stood up. His boot was fixed well enough. He straightened his coat. "Then let's go," he said, and his voice was steady, the voice of a man who had already made peace with the fact that the road he was on was not a safe one. They went faster. The afternoon wore away in that faster pace, the two of them moving through the deepening forest with the particular rhythm that develops between two people who are walking well together, the adjustment of stride and pace, the unspoken negotiation of obstacle and path. The sound of water grew clearer as the hours passed, not loud yet but consistent, a low undercurrent beneath all the other forest sounds, like something breathing. Then, without warning, the light changed. It happened between one step and the next. One moment they were in ordinary forest afternoon light, gold and directional, casting long shadows between the trees. The next, the shadows blurred, the light flattened, and there was, drifting through the trees ahead of them, a thin haze that was not quite fog, and not quite mist but was somewhere between the two, pale, and slow-moving, and smelling of absolutely nothing. Owen stopped. "Is that—" "Yes," she said. They looked at it together. The mist moved through the trees ahead with an unhurried certainty, curling around the trunks, filling the spaces between the branches in long, slow streams. As it reached them, Mara breathed in and felt it immediately. The particular blankness the trader had described. Not a smell, not the absence of smell. Something more like the concept of smell briefly pausing, like a conversation interrupted mid-sentence. Owen made a sound she could not quite categorize, not quite a laugh and not quite a breath. "I cannot describe what I am experiencing right now," he said. "Don't try," she said. "Just walk into it." They walked into it. The mist closed around them gradually, the way water closes around a stone you lower slowly into a pool. The trees were still visible but became suggestions of themselves, dark shapes in pale light, present without being entirely there. The sound of the falls came stronger now, filling the space where other sound had been, huge and constant and somehow comforting in the way that enormous consistent things were comforting, things that didn't stop and didn't change and would be there tomorrow. She had never been in the mist before. She had expected it to feel threatening. Instead, it felt like the sensation of setting down something very heavy that you had been carrying for so long you had forgotten it had weight. Her shoulders dropped. She walked through the mist toward the sound of the water, and Owen walked beside her, and neither of them spoke, and the forest watched them go, in its enormous patient way, and whatever had been watching them from the distance did not follow them in. Not yet. Not quite yet. The falls appeared ahead as a white blur in the mist, a vertical movement of light, the roar of it now filling everything, drowning out thought, drowning out worry, drowning out the particular low-level terror that had been running under everything she did for 3 years like a second heartbeat she couldn't stop. She found the cave behind the water almost by touch, following the rock face with one hand. the other hand steady on the blade she had not drawn. She went through the curtain of falling water and into the space behind it, and stood there in the roar and the dark and the coolness of it, and she breathed. Owen came in behind her. They stood there in the silence that wasn't silence, the roar so complete it became a kind of quiet. And that was when she heard the other voice, clear and dry and coming from the far end of the cave, from someone already sitting there in the dark. "You took longer than I expected," the voice said. "I have been waiting since yesterday." It was not a threat, it was simply a statement, but it came from the dark of a cave that was supposed to be empty, and Mara's hand was on the blade before the last word finished. She was not, as it turned out, the only one who had been running to the falls. She should have expected that. She had not expected that. The voice in the dark belonged to a woman who was older than anyone Mara had seen in a very long time. She was sitting cross-legged near the back wall of the cave, close enough to the curtain of falling water that its spray had left the front of her robe damp, which she appeared not to notice or mind. She had a small clay lamp burning beside her, the flame so steady in the still air of the cave that it looked painted. Her hair was completely white and cut very short, close to her head in a way that made her face look extraordinarily prominent, all bone structure and deep-set eyes that caught the lamplight and held it. She was looking at Mara with the particular attention of someone who has been waiting to look at a specific thing for a long time, and is now doing so with great care. "Sit," the woman said, not unkindly, just matter of fact. "Who are you?" Mara asked. "My name is Agnes," the woman said. "I was a healer for the Covenant once, a very long time ago." She paused. "You are Lena Ashvale's daughter." The name hit like cold water. Not Mara. Not the name she had been using for 3 years. The other one, her mother's name, her real name, the name that only people who had known her mother had any reason to know. Owen, who was standing just inside the cave entrance, was very quiet in the way people went quiet when they understood they were in the presence of something important that they did not entirely understand. "How do you know that name?" Mara asked. "I knew your mother," Agnes said simply. "I knew her when she was your age. I helped her when she ran, the same way I am trying to help you now. I have been making my way to this cave for 6 weeks. My knees are not what they were. I arrived yesterday and I have been sitting here since, which has given me a great deal of time to think and a significant amount of cave water on my knees, which I do not recommend." Mara looked at her. She did not lower the blade. Agnes glanced at it. "You will not need that. I will decide when I do not need it." The corner of Agnes's mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. "Good," she said. "Your mother would approve." She shifted on the cave floor, adjusting her position with some difficulty. "Come and sit, both of you. What I have to tell you is going to take some time, and I am not going to shout it over a waterfall." Mara looked at Owen. Owen shrugged very slightly, the expression of a man who had run out of categories for the day's events and had decided to simply stop trying to put things in order. She went and sat, not close to Agnes, but close enough. Owen sat behind and slightly to the side, in the way of someone who understood he was peripheral to whatever was happening, and was not going to pretend otherwise. Agnes looked at Mara for another long moment. "You have been hiding for 3 years," she said. "Your scent is masked, your mark is suppressed. You use a different name. You move regularly. You have lived in, let me guess, 7 places since you left the family's last location. Perhaps 8. 7, Mara said. Agnes nodded once. "You have done everything right," she said. "Everything your mother taught you, and everything you worked out for yourself. The problem is not what you have done. The problem is what you have not been told." "Then tell me." Agnes looked at her hands for a moment. They were small and folded in her lap, the hands of someone very old, the joints enlarged, the knuckles prominent. Then she looked back up. "You know the story of the war," she said. "You know the version that says the Covenant was destroyed. You know the version that says the bloodline ended." "Yes. Those stories were spread deliberately," Agnes said, "by the Covenant itself. After the war, when it became clear that the bloodline could not fight and could not hide in any conventional way, the remaining elders decided on a different approach. They spread the story of the destruction. They let the kingdom believe the line was dead, and then they took the last child, the only child who had not been found in the war, and they hid her." Mara said nothing. "The child was 3 years old," Agnes said. "Her mother carried her to a family in the southern hills, a family with no connection to the pack, no wolf blood, no reason to be watched. She left the child with that family, and she did not go back, not because she didn't want to, because going back would have been the thing that led them to the child." She paused. "The child's name was Lena." The lamp flame bent slightly in a breath of air from the falls. My mother was the child, Mara said. Yes. And the family she was left with was not her blood family, Agnes said. No, they were good people who kept a promise and never told her. She grew up not knowing. She had a normal childhood, or as normal as any childhood is. She married. She had you. Agnes looked at her very steadily. It was only when you were born, and your eyes came out that color, that she started to ask questions. Silver eyes do not come from ordinary bloodlines, and the more she asked, the more she found. And by the time you were 3 years old and the king's runners were beginning to extend their territory in ways that made people nervous, she knew what had to be done. She ran, Mara said. She ran. With you. And she spent the next 14 years keeping you alive. And hidden. And away from anyone who might recognize what you were. Agnes's voice was level and informational. A voice that had been keeping its feelings very carefully out of the way it delivered facts. When she was ill, the winter you were 17, she gave you the cloth, with the marks on it. Mara's hand moved toward the bag before she could stop it. Agnes saw the movement. You have it. Yes. But you cannot read the marks. They are not in any writing I know. No, Agnes said, they are in the Covenant's own script. Very few people can read it. I am one of them. She held out her hand. Mara looked at the hand. She looked at Agnes. She thought about 3 years of carrying that strip of cloth without knowing what it said. 3 years of looking at those marks and feeling that she was missing something essential. Something that would change the shape of everything if she only understood it. She opened the bag. She took out the cloth. She handed it to Agnes. The old woman unfolded it with great care. The way you handled something very old that you needed to be sure of not damaging. She held it up in the lamplight and read it quietly, her lips not moving. Her eyes moving along the marks with the focused patience of someone reading something they have not seen in a long time. The falls roared behind everything. Owen did not speak. Agnes put the cloth down on her lap. Your mother wrote this the winter she was ill, she said. She knew she was not going to survive it. She also knew that she had not told you everything, not because she did not want to, but because she had made herself believe there was more time. There is never more time. There is only ever the time you have, and then it is over. What does it say? Mara asked. Agnes was quiet for a moment. Then she said, It says that the Covenant was not destroyed in the war. It says the war was not fought to destroy the Covenant. It says the war was fought because the kingdom needed what the Covenant carried, and the only way to get it was to take it by force. And taking it by force was not possible because what the Covenant carried could not be taken. It could only be given. She folded her hands over the cloth. Your mother writes that you are the last of the Covenant bloodline, that the bloodline carries something. She calls it a seal, though that is not quite the right word in the Covenant script. The closest translation would be something like anchor or keeper. The bloodline carries this thing in its blood, inherited down through generations, building in strength with each one. By your generation it is very powerful. What does it do? Mara said. By itself, nothing, Agnes said. It is half of something. The other half lies in the throne, in the bloodline of the Alpha King. The two things together are what the Covenant was always meant to complete. The war was fought because the old king could not accept what completing it required. He wanted the power but not the terms. He could not take it. He could not destroy it. So he tried to wait out the bloodline, to find a generation that did not understand what they had and would not refuse. Owen said quietly, from behind Mara. What does completing it do? Agnes looked at him. Are you familiar with the Blight? She asked. He went still. I thought so, Agnes said. Everyone along the northern roads knows about the Blight. They may not call it that. They may call it the sickness, or the change, or whatever word the local pack uses for the thing that has been quietly dismantling wolf settlements for the past 20 years. The thing that takes healthy wolves and makes them something else, not feral in the way of a wild animal, but feral in the way of something that has lost its fundamental nature, something that has come loose from what it was. She looked at her hands again. The Covenant knew about it. They predicted it, in fact, 400 years ago. They called it the unraveling. They said it would come if the seal was not completed within a certain span of time. And the time, Mara said, is now, Agnes said, or close to it. Your mother's message says the Blight will become uncontrollable within a generation, possibly much sooner. She writes that the only way to stop it, the only way, is for the last Covenant descendant to complete the bond with the Alpha King. Mara felt the cave floor under her very clearly. She felt the cold of it through the material of her clothes. The roar of the water was enormous and constant, and she let herself hear it for a moment. Let it fill the space where words would have been. The king's family destroyed the Covenant, she said. Her voice was completely steady. She had no idea how it was completely steady. Yes, Agnes said. His grandfather started the war that killed the people my grandmother came from, that killed the family my mother could never go back to. Yes. And the answer to all of it is for me to complete a bond with him. Yes, Agnes said with the particular gentleness of someone delivering information they know perfectly well is terrible, but which is nevertheless true. I am sorry. I know what I am telling you. I am not pretending it is simple or that it should feel acceptable. Your mother knew it too. She writes, near the end of the message, that she wishes she had the right to make this decision for you, and that she does not. She writes that she is sorry she cannot be there to help you carry it. Agnes's voice did not waver, but something in it shifted slightly. A tightening that was there, and then not there. She was a remarkable woman. Mara looked at the cloth on Agnes's lap. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "The king does not know this." "The king knows some of it," Agnes said. "The throne carries generational knowledge, passed from king to king in their own way, though how much has survived the generations, and how accurately, I cannot say. What I can tell you is that this king, Caius, they call him, the current one, is not the king his grandfather was. The people who know him say that much at least. People who know a king tend to say favorable things about him," Mara said. "Usually," Agnes agreed. "In this case I believe it is more complicated than flattery. But we do not need to trust him. We need to understand the situation clearly, and the situation clearly is this. The moon rises in 6 days. The hunt begins. And whether you choose to engage with what your bloodline requires, or whether you choose to run further and faster and hide somewhere even the mist cannot protect you, the blight will continue, and the wolves who are losing themselves to it will lose themselves, and there will be more, and then more." She paused. "I am not telling you what to choose. I told your mother I would find you and give you the truth, and that is what I am doing. The choice is yours." Mara stood up. She went to the edge of the cave, to the curtain of the falls, and she looked out through the water at the mist beyond. The mist moved in its slow, aimless way, filling all the spaces, erasing all the edges, making everything softer and more uncertain. She had come here to hide. She had come here because the falls were supposed to make her untraceable, unseeable, unreachable. She had come here because 3 years of running had left her with a very clear understanding of how long a person could survive on the road alone, and she was not ready to stop surviving. Behind her, Owen said nothing. Agnes said nothing. The water fell and fell and fell. She thought about the blight. She had seen the edges of it. Once, in a village she had passed through in her 2nd year of running. A place where the people were quiet in the wrong way, and the wolf pack that was supposed to be part of the community was instead at its edge, distant and strange. Some of them moving with the unsettled quality of animals that had been frightened by something they couldn't see, and hadn't come back from the fright. She hadn't stayed long in that village. She had added it to the list of things she was choosing not to think about. The list was getting long. She turned back. "The trader who told me about the falls," she said. "The one who described the mist, the scent disruption. He passed through Valehaven 8 months ago. He was specific, very specific." She looked at Agnes. "Did you send him?" Agnes considered this. "I may have pointed certain people toward certain conversations," she said. "How long have you been looking for me?" "Since your mother died," Agnes said. 11 years. 11 years. Mara had been 6 years old when her mother died. She had spent the next 11 years moving through the world with no idea that a 70-year-old woman with damaged knees had been making her way toward the same point from a completely different direction. "Are there others who are looking for me?" she asked. "Others who know what I am, besides the king's people?" "Yes," Agnes said. "Not many, but yes." "Who?" "There are some who are part of the covenant or who carry information from it, who want you found for the same reason I do, because they understand what the blight is and what stopping it requires. And there are others," she said, with that careful precision, "who want you found for different reasons, who believe that the power in the bloodline could be used for things other than what the covenant intended." "What things?" "The power," Agnes said quietly, "that can stop the blight can also, if taken by force or used in the wrong way, do the reverse. Accelerate it. Weaponize it." She folded the cloth again and held it out. "Which is why the completion requires 2 people who choose it, both of them, freely. Not compulsion, not force. Consent on both sides, freely given, or the seal doesn't close. It falls apart. And when that happens," she stopped, "it would be very bad." Mara took the cloth back and put it in her bag. She thought about the howls she had heard in the forest, the one that had been moving toward Valehaven, the feeling of observation that had followed her all morning. "How many people know about this cave?" she asked. More than either of us would like, Agnes said. Then we are not safe here. We are safer here than anywhere else I know, Agnes said. The mist will buy us time. Not unlimited time, but time. Time. 6 days until the moon. Mara looked at Owen, who was sitting very still with the expression of a man who had come to find a safe place for his daughter, and had instead found himself sitting in a cave behind a waterfall at the center of a 30-year-old crisis that he had no part in and no way out of. He met her eyes. I have no intention of telling anyone any of this, he said. I know, she said. Outside, something changed. Not a sound, not a visible thing, but the mist moved differently for a moment, in a way that was not the usual drift. It moved as if something large had walked through it somewhere beyond the trees, disturbing it the way you disturbed water when you waded into it. All three of them felt it. Agnes did not look alarmed. She looked like someone who had anticipated this moment and was now noting its arrival with the calm of a person who had prepared. The hunt, Owen said quietly, has started early. Not the claiming moon hunt, Agnes said. The moon rises in 6 days. But there are other hunters. She looked at Mara. The ones who want the bloodline for the wrong reasons. They have been following you longer than you know. The mist confused them. It will not stop them. Mara's hand found the blade. The mist outside the falls moved again. Something was coming through it. She stood at the cave entrance, behind the curtain of falling water, and she watched the mist for the shape that would emerge from it, and she felt, with a clarity that was very close to calm, that the time for running in the way she had been running was over. What came next was going to be different. She was not sure yet what different meant. But she stood there and she watched, and she did not step back. 2 people came through the mist. The first was young, 17 or 18 at most, moving with the cautious speed of someone who had been running hard for a long time and was not entirely sure the running was finished. She was tall, with close-cropped dark hair, and the expression of someone who had decided some time ago that being frightened was not going to be useful, and had put that away, and was now operating on pure forward motion. She came through the curtain of water into the cave with her arms up to protect her face, and stopped dead when she saw Mara. The second person came in right behind her, slower, not from age but from caution, scanning the cave from the entrance before fully committing to entering. He was perhaps 30, lean, with the kind of alertness in his eyes that came from spending extended time in situations where being observant was the difference between continuing to exist and not. Owen said, "Clara." The girl spun around. "Dad." Her voice had the specific quality of a person who had been holding something very tightly and had just been given permission to let it go. She crossed the cave in 4 steps and ran directly into her father, and he caught her and held on, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Mara looked at the second person. He was looking at her. "I found her on the East Road," he said. His name, he told them shortly after, was Nathan. He offered no last name and she did not ask for one. He was a cartographer. She would have guessed that without being told, from the way his eyes moved over the cave space and immediately understood its dimensions and exits. She was moving fast and in the right direction, so I asked if she knew where she was going. She said she was going to the falls. I was going to the falls. It seemed sensible. "You are a cartographer," Agnes said. Nathan looked at her. "Yes." "Who employs you?" "No one, currently," he said. "I work independently. I map areas that the official kingdom maps have left blank." He paused. "Which is a category that includes most of the most interesting places in the kingdom." Agnes studied him for a moment in the way she studied everything, thoroughly, without hurry, as if she had already decided she was going to reach a conclusion, and was simply letting the process run its proper course. "Sit," she said. He sat. He had clearly been given orders by people with more presence than him before, and had survived by cooperating with them. Clara, having separated from Owen with the speed of someone who had briefly allowed herself to need comfort, and had now resumed the independent operation she preferred, looked around the cave with those wide, fast-reading eyes, and then looked at Mara. "You are the one they are looking for," she said. It was not a question. "What makes you say that?" Mara asked. "Because when we came through the mist, I could feel a direction," Clara said. "Like a pull, toward something. My mother explained to me when I was young that half-wolf sensing worked differently than full wolf, less specific, more like a general awareness of what's important in a space, what's significant. You are significant." She said this last word with the directness of someone who had not yet learned that some things were considered rude to say, or who had learned it and decided the information was too useful to withhold. "Also, your eyes are an unusual color." Owen made a quiet sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "My name is Mara," Mara said. Clara considered this. Is that your real name? It is the name I use. That is not the same answer. No, Mara agreed. Agnes, who had been watching this exchange with the expression of someone observing something that was going exactly as it ought to, said, "We need to talk about what happens next." She looked at each of them in turn. The mist is disrupting tracking. But the people who came through the forest an hour ago, I heard them from inside this cave, and they were not quiet about it. They are not relying on scent or sound. They are working from information. Someone gave them the location of the falls. Who? Owen said. I do not know. But someone who knows what the falls are and why a person hiding from a hunt would choose them. She paused. They cannot see through the mist, and they cannot follow a scent trail through it. But they can wait at the edge of it. And the mist does not extend past the tree line on the south side. I checked when I arrived. If you were to leave this cave from the south, you would step out of the mist's protection within a quarter mile. How many of them? Mara asked. I counted 4 sets of footsteps, Agnes said. But footsteps in the forest can be misleading. Sound reflects. 4 at least, possibly more. Nathan had opened a leather case that had been over his shoulder and was looking at a folded piece of parchment. Not quite a map, she realized, but a sketch. The kind of quick working document a cartographer made in the field. He unfolded it carefully and spread it on the cave floor, holding the edges down with flat stones he picked from the ground. The falls, he said, indicating the sketch. He had drawn the basin from memory, the 2 ridges, the valley between them, the position of the falls at the far north end. The mist zone he had indicated with a series of light hatching marks. The mist extends, from what I could determine on the way in, approximately 500 feet in all directions from the water's edge. The south side ends here. He pointed. The west ridge extends past the mist zone up here, which means the ridge itself is outside the mist protection. Same on the east. He traced the ridge lines with one finger. The only direction where the mist coverage continues for a significant distance is north. What is north of the falls? Owen asked. The Thorn Wall, Nathan said. The old border barrier between this kingdom and the highlands. Most of it has been unmaintained for 30 years and is passable if you know where to look. I know where to look. He looked up. I have mapped the highlands. I know roads through them that are not on any official document. Agnes was looking at the sketch with interest. How did you know to map this area? I didn't, Nathan said. I was mapping the Thorn Wall from my own archive. The falls appeared on my route and I investigated. He refolded the sketch. I have spent the last 2 years making records of places that official maps exclude. Places people go when they need to disappear. It is not a business, precisely. It is more of a personal project. Why? Clara said. He looked at her, slightly surprised by the directness of the question. Because I believe geography is one of the most important forms of safety that exists, he said. Knowing where the exits are. Knowing which roads are watched and which are not. That knowledge has always belonged to the people who controlled it. Armies, rulers, official mapmakers. I believe it should belong to everyone. Clara nodded, satisfied, in the way of someone who had received an explanation that met their standard. Mara looked at the group in the cave, a half-wolf girl, her father who had followed her on bad knees and worse sleep, a cartographer with illegal maps and a philosophy, an old woman who had been searching for her for 11 years with damaged knees and apparently unlimited patience. None of them had any particular reason to be here, except the specific confluence of disasters that had directed them all to the same cave. The people outside, Mara said. You said they want the bloodline for the wrong reasons. What does that mean in practical terms? What will they actually do? Agnes looked at her steadily. They will take you, she said, not kill you. The bloodline has to be alive for any of this to matter. They will take you, and they will attempt to force the completion of the bond under conditions that will destroy the seal rather than close it. They do not care about the blight. They care about what the destroyed seal releases. Which is? Agnes was quiet for a moment. The seal that holds the blight in check also, in being a seal, contains something. The blight is not a disease that arose from nothing. It is a consequence, a symptom of something much older that the Covenant bound and sealed 4 centuries ago. If the seal is deliberately broken rather than properly closed, what it contains does not stay contained. She paused. I will not describe to you what that looks like in practice. I watched what happened to a single village in the highlands when the outer ward of the binding weakened 20 years ago. I have no wish to see it happen to an entire kingdom. The falls went on and on behind them, its roar filling every silence. So either I complete the bond properly with the Alpha King, Mara said, or the people outside take me and break it wrong, and something much worse than the blight gets loose. Yes, Agnes said, that is the situation. And the Alpha King himself, Mara said. He is currently hunting for his fated mate during the claiming moon hunt. Does he know any of this? Does he know what the bond actually is or what it requires? He knows the throne carries a specific bloodline obligation, Agnes said. Whether he understands the full depth of it, I cannot say. The knowledge has been passed down with varying accuracy across the generations. The war interrupted a great deal. His grandfather was not a man who kept careful records of things that made him look like he had done something wrong. Clara, who had been listening with the particular absorption of someone with a fast mind that was pulling information apart and reassembling it, said, "He is 6 days away. The people outside are here now." "Yes," Mara said. "So the immediate problem is the people outside?" "Yes." "And then the 6-day problem?" "Yes." Clara turned to her father. "What do we have?" Owen blinked at being addressed as though he were in a planning session. Then he straightened slightly and took stock. "2 blades between us. Mine is better. 3 days of food if we are careful. Water from the falls, which we can access from inside the cave. The cartographer's maps. Agnes's knowledge." He paused. "And the mist, which is protecting our position currently." "They cannot come in through the mist," Nathan said. "Not without losing their tracking ability entirely. If they are relying on directional information, knowing the cave is at the falls, knowing we are here, then inside the mist, they have only general direction. They would walk to the falls and find the cave purely through physical search, which takes time." "How much time?" Mara asked. "Hours," he said. "Maybe more. The mist zone is not small and the terrain is difficult. They would be searching essentially blind for a cave entrance that is behind a waterfall. If they know it is here, they find it eventually. If they don't know specifically where it is, then we have time," Mara said. "We have time," he agreed. She thought. In the 3 years she had been running, she had learned a great deal about the way pursuit worked. She had learned that the people doing the chasing fell into 2 categories, those who were looking for something specific, and those who were looking to find and keep. The first kind were faster but more disruptible. Give them the wrong signal and they would follow it. The second kind were slower but more patient. They did not chase, they waited, and patience was very hard to beat. The people outside were the second kind. She was almost certain of it. They were at the edge of the mist because they knew the mist protected the person they wanted. They were not charging in, they were settling in, they were going to wait her out. The north route, through the thorn wall. "How long to the thorn wall from here?" she asked Nathan. 4 hours roughly, if the terrain cooperates. He hesitated. "But the thorn wall itself, the highlands beyond it, that is not a safe destination in the usual sense. The people there have their own concerns and their own rules, and they do not welcome strangers freely." "But you know them," Mara said. "You have mapped their territory. You have dealt with them." "Yes." "Then you know how to approach them in a way that doesn't get us turned away at the border." He looked at her. "You want to go north?" "Not permanently," she said. "Just long enough for the people in the mist to understand that we are no longer in the mist. That following us north means entering territory that is not theirs, and dealing with people who will not be cooperative. The Highland clans are not. I am not asking you to introduce me to the Highland clans," she said. "I am asking you to help me use the thorn wall as a barrier. There is a difference." She turned to Agnes. "Can you travel north? Through difficult terrain?" Agnes considered this. "If we move at a reasonable pace, yes. My knees are not good, but they are functional. I have managed worse." "Owen?" He nodded. "Clara?" Clara had the expression of someone who had been hoping to be given something difficult to do. "Yes," she said. Mara looked at the cave entrance. The falls fell and fell, endless and certain. Going north was not going toward the king. Going north was going away from the people outside the mist, away from the immediate danger, into territory that the hunters outside had no leverage in. It bought time. It did not solve anything, but it bought time, and time was what she needed to think through the parts of this that she had not yet thought through. The 6-day problem, the Alpha King and his hunt, and the seal that needed 2 people who chose freely, and the war that his grandfather had started, and the mother she had never had enough of, and the name on the cloth that she had not said aloud in 3 years. "We leave through the back of the cave," she said. "Nathan, you take point. You know the terrain. Agnes, you are behind him. Owen and Clara, you stay together. I am in the rear." "Why the rear?" Clara asked. "Because if something follows us, I want to see it first." Clara accepted this with a nod. Nathan was already refolding his sketch with the efficiency of a man who was used to moving quickly and keeping his equipment in order. Agnes rose from the cave floor with the specific dignity of someone who was not going to ask for help even if it would have been reasonable to do so. Owen put his arm around Clara briefly, the gesture of a parent who understood that his daughter didn't want to be protected but couldn't quite stop himself from trying. Clara allowed it for exactly 3 seconds before stepping forward. Mara looked once more at the falls. From inside the cave, looking out through the curtain of water, the world beyond was white and blurred and beautiful, the mist and the spray turning everything soft. She had thought, when she first stepped through the water this morning, that it felt like putting something heavy down. She thought that again now. But there was a difference. The first time, putting something down felt like relief. This time it felt like preparation. Something was ending. She was not sure what was beginning. She turned away from the falls and followed the others into the back of the cave, where the rock wall curved and the light from Nathan's small lamp cast long shadows, and the sound of the water became a background instead of a foreground, and the cold of the cave settled into her bones in a way that felt very much like clarity. The back wall of the cave had a crack in it, low and narrow but traversable. She had checked it when they first arrived, had run her hands along the wall in the dark while Agnes was talking, while Owen was listening, her hands learning the cave the way hands learned things better than eyes did sometimes. Nathan stopped at the crack and looked at it, and then looked at her. "You knew this was here," he said. "I checked," she said. "Go through." He went through. The crack opened, on the other side, into a narrow passage that smelled of cold rock and old water, the specific smell of places that had been underground for a very long time. Agnes went through next, sideways, with a controlled precision that suggested she had navigated through tighter places than this. Owen went through, Clara went through with room to spare. Mara went through last. The crack closed behind her, in a manner of speaking. She could still see back into the cave, the lamp left on the floor still burning. She watched the curtain of falling water for 3 long seconds. Nothing moved on the other side of it yet. She turned and followed the others into the dark. The passage was short. It opened after perhaps 40 feet into a secondary space, smaller than the main cave, with a natural opening in the ceiling that let in a column of mist-filtered gray light. From there another passage ran northeast, which Nathan identified immediately, his hand already on the rock wall, his lamp held low. "Here," he said quietly. "This takes us out above the mist line. The ground is rough but manageable." They followed the light and the voice of the water and each other through the rock, single file, careful with their feet, and the roar of the falls faded by degrees as they went, becoming quieter and then quieter still, until it was just the memory of a sound, and then even that was gone, and there was only the dark and the cold and the sound of 5 people breathing as they moved toward the opening ahead. The opening came in a crack of gray sky and cold air and the smell of high rock and pine. They emerged onto the slope above the falls, above the mist, above everything, into a world that was cold and clear and exposed, with the thorn wall visible ahead of them as a dark, jagged line against the sky, and behind them, the mist sitting in the valley like a soft white lake. Nothing emerged from the mist behind them. Not yet. The wind moved across the exposed slope and Mara pulled her collar up and looked north at the thorn wall and south at the mist, and felt, for a very specific moment, exactly where she was between the two. "Move," she said quietly. They moved. The thorn wall was not a wall. That was the first thing she understood when they reached it near midday. She had imagined something deliberate, stones laid by hands, borders drawn and marked the way kingdoms marked things, a clear line between here and there with a gate somewhere in it. What she found instead was a ridge of rock that ran east to west as far as she could see in either direction, erupting out of the ground at jagged angles, not built but broken, like something beneath the earth had once pushed up with tremendous force, and then stopped and left the result behind as a problem for everyone who came after. It was impassable in most places. In some places it was simply steep and required hands and feet both. In a few places it was something else entirely. Narrow, navigable, known. Nathan knew the place. He led them to it without hesitation. A section of the wall where a long-ago collapse had left a tumbled slope of loose rock that could be climbed with care, rising to a gap in the ridge's top that was just wide enough to pass through single file. He went first, testing holds, moving steadily, and the others followed. Agnes went slower than the rest but went, her jaw set in the expression of someone applying willpower to a physical problem and finding the combination adequate. Owen stayed close behind her without making it obvious that he was staying close behind her. Clara went up the slope the way she moved through everything, fast, balanced, very little wasted motion. Mara went last, and from the top of the thorn wall she stopped and looked back. The valley behind them was a wash of gray mist and dark treetops, the falls invisible from here but not silent. Even from this distance she could hear the faintest suggestion of the water, or perhaps she was imagining it, because she knew it was there. She could not see anyone moving at the mist's edge. She could not see the hunters. That did not mean they weren't there. She turned and went over the thorn wall into the highlands. The highlands were different in the way that places were different when they had not been managed by a kingdom, uneven, unpredictable, beautiful in a stark and demanding way. The trees here were different species, shorter, broader, dark-needled, built for cold. The ground between them was thick with heather, brown-gray at this time of year, but suggesting that in another season it would be extraordinary. The air was cleaner and colder than the air in the Wren forest, thinned out by altitude, the kind of air that made you slightly more awake with each breath, slightly more aware of your own body. They moved north along a path that was barely a path, a line of slightly less resistance through the heather, the ground underfoot packed where feet had passed many times over many years. Nathan followed it by instinct, or memory, or both. He had been here before, that much was clear in the way his body moved through the landscape, the specific ease of familiarity. No one spoke much. Clara walked beside her father for a while, and then moved up to walk beside Mara, which Mara noted without comment. The girl was thinking about something. You could tell by the way her eyes moved, not scanning the landscape, but focused somewhere internal, running something back and forth through her mind. After perhaps 20 minutes of walking, Clara said, "The thing Agnes described, the seal that can be broken or closed, can you feel it?" Mara said, "What do you mean?" "The pull I felt in the cave, toward you. You said you could feel something following you, in the forest. Not the hunters, something else." Clara's voice was matter of fact, the voice of someone who was asking a technical question rather than a personal one. "I am curious whether the Covenant bloodline produces a corresponding sensation, a pull toward something." Mara walked for a few steps before answering. "There is something," she said. "I have always attributed it to anxiety, or to the hypervigilance of spending 3 years waiting for something bad to happen. But it is directional," Clara said. Mara looked at her. "Yes, it is directional." "Which direction?" Mara said nothing. Clara waited. "South," Mara said. "Since yesterday morning. South and slightly east. Getting stronger the more I move away from it, which is counterintuitive." "That is probably the bond," Clara said. "The incomplete one. If the Covenant bloodline and the Alpha King's bloodline are meant to complete something together, then proximity would make the signal stronger, and distance would make it more noticeable as absence. Like a missing tooth. You feel it most when your tongue finds the empty space." It was, Mara thought, a remarkably precise description for a 17-year-old who had not known any of this existed 2 days ago. "How do you know any of this?" she asked. "I am inferring," Clara said. "From everything Agnes told us and from what I can feel myself and from what I know about how half-wolf sensing works." She paused. "I am also extremely interested in how things work, generally. My father says it is exhausting. I think it is practical." Owen, who was close enough to have heard, said, "Both." They made better time than Mara had expected. Nathan moved them efficiently, never pushing past the pace that Agnes could sustain but never wasting motion either. They stopped once at a stream that came down from the high ground in a cold, fast rush over flat stones, refilling water and eating briefly. Agnes ate her portion sitting on a rock with the same dignified efficiency she applied to everything. It was during this stop that Nathan told them what he knew about the Highlands. "There are 3 main clans," he said. "They are not at war with each other currently, but their agreements are recent and not particularly robust. They control different territories. The Eastern clan holds most of the good farmland, the Western clan controls the coast routes, and the Central clan, which is the largest, holds this territory here, the ground between the Thorn Wall and the high moors." "Which clan did you deal with?" Mara asked. "The Central one," he said. "They are called the Verret. I spent 4 months mapping their eastern boundary 2 years ago, with their permission. They are not warm, exactly, but they are fair. And they dislike kingdom interference intensely, which means that if the people who were watching the falls follow us over the Thorn Wall, they will find the Verret extremely unreceptive. Would the Verret protect us?" He considered this. "The Verret would not involve themselves in a kingdom dispute for any reason that didn't benefit them, if we could offer something they wanted." "We cannot offer anything we don't have," Mara said. "What do we have?" Clara asked, in the same practical tone she applied to everything. Agnes said from her rock, "Information, and time, and the bloodline." She said the last thing without particular emphasis, as if it were simply another item on a list. "The Blight does not respect borders. The Verret have seen the edges of it on their eastern boundary for 3 years. They know something is wrong with the South even if they do not know the name of the thing that is wrong. Information about what the blight is and what stops it has a value. You want to tell them, Mara said. I want to give us a reason to be sheltered, Agnes said. The truth is often useful for that. They moved on. The afternoon light was long and cold when they first saw the Verret settlement, or rather, when they first saw signs of it, which was not the same thing. The settlements in the highlands were deliberately difficult to spot from a distance, built into the landscape rather than on top of it, using the slope of the terrain as cover. What you saw first were signs, a carved mark on a specific rock, a particular arrangement of stones across the path that was too deliberate to be accidental, the smell of wood smoke that was there and then not there in the wind. Nathan stopped them with one hand. He turned to Mara. Let me speak first, he said. They know me. Seeing me appear over the thorn wall with 4 strangers in the middle of the afternoon is the kind of thing that will be noticed before we reach their first post. If I am recognized before they see you, they will be less likely to respond with hostility. Go, she said. He walked ahead. They watched him stop at a point in the path where nothing appeared to change but where he clearly understood something was there, some kind of boundary or marker. He stood very still and waited. Nothing happened for almost 2 minutes. Then a figure appeared from the heather to the left, not emerging from cover but simply becoming visible, standing up from a position that had made them invisible at ground level. A woman, perhaps 40, dressed in the same shades as the winter heather, with a short spear held loosely across her body, and an expression that conveyed the quality of someone who was not unfriendly, but was also not going to default to friendly until she had a reason. She and Nathan spoke. Mara could not hear the words from this distance. She watched the body language, which told its own story. Nathan was explaining. The woman was listening. The woman's eyes came to rest on the group behind Nathan twice during the conversation. On the second look, she looked at Mara specifically and did not look away immediately. Then she said something to Nathan and turned and walked north, and Nathan turned and waved them forward. Her name is Bryn, he said when they reached him. She is a post warden, one of the outer sentries. She knows me. She is taking us to the clan hold, which is another hour north. The elder there will decide whether we stay or go. What did you tell her? Mara asked. That we are coming from below the thorn wall, and that there are people below the thorn wall who do not have the Verret's best interests at heart. He paused. Which is accurate. And about me, Mara said. I told her you had information about the blight. She looked at him. It is true, he said. They followed Bryn north through the heather. The hold was not what the word suggested. There was no central building, no fortress, no single point of obvious authority. It was a collection of low stone structures connected by pathways, built so close to the earth that from 50 feet away they appeared to be features of the landscape. The activity around them made them legible. People moving between the buildings, the sound of work, the smell of food and fire, and the specific busy quality of a community that ran its life with purpose. People stopped and looked as they passed. Not with hostility exactly, but with the frank assessment of a community that had developed a very refined eye for threat. Bryn brought them to the largest of the low buildings and stopped outside it. She spoke briefly, presumably to a guard, and then stood aside and gestured for them to go in. Inside it was warm, which hit Mara after the cold of the highlands like a physical thing. There was a central fire, well managed, low and steady. Around it, 3 people sat. One was old, older even than Agnes, a man who might have been 80, with a face that had been reduced by time to its essential structure, all planes and patience. The other 2 were younger, both male, both with the compact, watchful energy of people who operated as advisors or guards or possibly both. The old man looked at them in the specific way of someone who had been looking at people for a very long time and had developed his own accurate system for what he saw. Agnes stepped forward. The old man's eyes moved to her and stayed. Agnes said something in a language Mara did not know, something short, perhaps 3 or 4 words, spoken with the precision of a greeting that carried specific meaning. The old man was silent for a moment. Then he replied in the same language, also briefly. Agnes turned to the group. He says we may sit, she said. They sat. The old man's name, Agnes translated, was Edric. He had led the Central Verret clan for 22 years. He had, in those 22 years, seen 3 separate attempts by the kingdom to extend its formal reach into the highlands, resisted all 3, and developed a thorough and detailed understanding of what the kingdom's formal reach actually meant in practice. Agnes spoke to him at some length, in the language Mara did not know, which she recognized at some point was not a different language but an older form of the same language, the Covenant's own tongue, which apparently had not entirely died. Edric listened. He asked 2 questions. Agnes answered both. Edric looked at Mara for a long moment. His eyes were dark and very still, like deep water on a windless day. He said something directly to her, in the old tongue, slowly enough that she almost caught the shape of it. Agnes translated. He says you look like someone who is trying to decide whether the thing in front of them is a door or a wall. What does he recommend? Mara said. Agnes translated the question. Edric replied. Agnes translated back. He says it is too soon to tell, but that the difference is usually felt, not seen. He says if it feels like a wall, you will break against it. If it feels like a door, you will find the handle. She sat with that. The fire burned low and steady. Outside, the highlands settled into evening, the cold coming down the slopes with the patience of things that knew they would eventually arrive. Agnes and Edric continued to speak at intervals, with long silences between. Nathan produced his maps and showed them to the two younger men, who studied them with intense interest. Owen and Clara sat together by the wall, Clara's head eventually dropping to her father's shoulder, in the way of someone who had been awake and alert for too long, and had finally located the minimum required safety to let that end. Mara did not sleep. She sat by the fire and thought. In the morning, Agnes told her, 2 Verret riders had gone south to observe the situation at the Thornwall. Bryn, the post warden, had sent them before they arrived at the hold. The Verret kept eyes on all crossing points, and the activity below the Thornwall had been noted before Nathan's group ever reached it. The riders would return with information by mid-morning. Mara asked, "What did Edric say about helping us?" Agnes said, "He said he would hear the information first." And then? Agnes was quiet for a moment.
He is a careful man.
He has kept his people safe for 22 years by being careful, but he is also a man who has watched the Blight move closer to his eastern boundary for 3 years, and has had no framework for understanding it. She paused. He now has a framework. What he does with it will be his choice. In the night, when the others were sleeping and the fire was banked low and Edric had withdrawn to his own quarters, Mara sat alone by the coals and felt the pull. South and slightly east, stronger now than it had been this morning. Not because she was closer, she was farther away. She had moved north all day. Stronger because she had stopped moving, because when you were still, the absence of something was more obvious than when you were in motion, filling the space with the sound of your own footsteps. She thought about what Agnes had said. The completion required 2 people choosing freely, both of them. It could not be forced, could not be taken, could not be compelled. That meant that whoever came was going to have to ask, was going to have to stand in front of her and ask. She thought about the king. She had never seen him. She had a name and a general description from things travelers said, the way people talked about someone powerful, half accurate and half projection. People filling in the parts they couldn't know, with the parts they wanted to believe. He was young for a king. He was not what people expected. He walked into the Wren Forest alone. She did not know what any of that meant about who he actually was. But she knew that he was coming. She could feel it in the pull that had been south and slightly east all day. Not getting stronger because he was getting closer, getting stronger because she was getting quieter, and in the quiet, the signal was very clear. He was coming. He had been coming since before she left Valehaven. The question that remained, the one she sat with in the dark of the Highland hold, the fire coals glowing orange and slow, was not whether he would find her. She had moved past that question sometime in the middle of the afternoon, somewhere between the Thornwall and the heather, and Agnes's voice saying the seal could not be closed without free choice. The question was what she was going to say. She did not have the answer yet, but she was, for the first time in 3 years, sitting still enough to look for it. The Verret riders came back at mid-morning, as Bryn had said they would. There were 2 of them, both young, both carrying the specific taut quality of people who had ridden hard and come back with information they considered urgent. They spoke to Bryn first, and Bryn's face changed in a way that was not alarming exactly but was not reassuring either. Then Bryn took them to Edric. Agnes was called. Agnes went, and Mara followed, because at this point the courtesies of waiting to be invited had become less important than the practical reality that everything being discussed concerned her directly. Edric looked at her when she entered, but he did not ask her to leave. The riders gave their report. It was in the Highland tongue, which was close enough to the lowland dialect that Mara could follow about half of it. Agnes caught her eye at one point and began quietly translating the parts she was missing. 4 people had been at the edge of the mist zone near the falls when the riders watched. Not the rough-clothed opportunists she had imagined. These were organized, equipped, the kind of people who operated with the backing of something larger than themselves. They had spent the night at the mist's edge, and had entered the mist at first light, which took courage or specific instruction or both. The riders had not followed them in. They had watched from the ridge above, which gave them sight of the general area without entering the disrupted zone. The people had not come out. They are still in the mist, Mara said. Agnes relayed the question. One of the riders answered. Agnes translated. The riders believe they are still in the mist. They saw no one emerge from the south side during the full time they watched, which was most of the night. The cave behind the falls was found. The riders saw 2 of the 4 approach the water, which means they found the entrance. But whether they found the passage through the back wall, the riders cannot say. They will find it, Mara said. Eventually. Agnes nodded. When they do, they will see that the passage leads above the mist zone, Mara continued, and they will look for the only place to cross the thorn wall in this section. She looked at Nathan. Nathan was already at the door. There is only one crossing that is passable without specialized equipment, he said. The one we used. Then they will cross there. Yes. How long before they do? Nathan calculated. If they found the passage this morning, and if they are as prepared as they appear to be, they could be at the Thornwall crossing by late afternoon, at the Thornwall itself by evening, over it by nightfall. Edric spoke. Agnes translated. He says the Verret do not interfere with crossings of the Thornwall. That is their agreement with the Highland passage routes. They watch but do not stop. The Highlands are free territory. But, Mara said, she had heard a but in the shape of what Agnes had not yet translated. Agnes looked at Edric, who had apparently heard the but in her tone as well, and replied to it directly. Agnes turned back to Mara. He says the Verret do not interfere with crossings, but he says the Highland territory is his clan's territory, and within that territory he has the authority to say who is welcome and who is not. Someone crossing into his territory to pursue a person he has granted shelter to is a violation of the shelter agreement, which is the oldest law his people hold. He would stop them? He says he would ask them to state their business. If their business is what he believes it to be, he would inform them that the person they are looking for is not here. Edric spoke again, and Agnes's expression shifted slightly. Not alarmed, but attentive. He also says, Agnes continued, that he would like to know who sent them, because the nature of this business suggests someone with resources and specific knowledge of the covenant, and there are very few people in the kingdom who qualify, and he is concerned about who they are. There was something in the way Agnes said the last sentence, a care in it. You know who sent them, Mara said. Agnes was quiet for a moment. I have a belief about it, she said. I do not have certainty, and I am not going to say it aloud until I do, because if I am wrong, the consequences of saying it carelessly are severe. Mara accepted this. She had learned in 3 years of surviving on good information and bad, to respect the difference between certainty and belief. Someone who knew the difference and refused to conflate the two was more trustworthy than someone who stated everything with equal confidence. She looked at Edric. What does he need from us? Agnes asked him. Edric replied at some length. The 2 younger men who had been present since yesterday were listening carefully. Agnes translated. He says he needs to understand the full shape of what is happening. Not just the blight and the seal and the covenant bloodline. He says he has heard those things and he finds them. He uses a word that translates roughly as weight-bearing, meaning significant, meaning he believes them to be true and consequential. But he says there is a piece he does not yet understand. She paused. He says, where is the other half? The king, Mara said. Yes. I do not know where he is. Agnes translated. Edric replied. Agnes said, he says you do. Mara looked at the old man across the fire. Edric was looking at her with those still, dark eyes, and there was something in them that was not challenge but was very close to it. The look of someone who was asking you to be honest about something you had been avoiding. South and slightly east, she said, getting closer. Agnes did not need to translate. Edric had understood that much, apparently. He spoke. Agnes said, he says how close. Mara felt it. She had not allowed herself to feel it carefully in the past day, had held it at the edge of her attention rather than in the center of it, because holding something like that in the center of your attention took a certain quality of stillness she had not been able to spare. Now she let herself feel it clearly. Closer than yesterday, much closer than yesterday. He had not stopped moving. Wherever he had been when she left Valehaven, he had been moving toward her continuously since then, through the day and the night. He was not navigating toward the falls. He was navigating toward something else, something the falls was irrelevant to. He did not need her scent. He did not need her tracks. He was navigating toward the specific thing in her blood that pulled toward the thing in his. He crossed the thorn wall last night, she said. Agnes translated. Edric replied. Agnes turned to Mara. He says his riders saw one person cross the thorn wall at the western crossing 12 hours ago, alone, moving north. One person, alone. Agnes said. He says the person was wearing a kingdom soldier's travel cloak but moving without a military formation, without supply riders, without the structure of an official approach, moving as a single individual. His riders chose not to intercept. Because one person alone is not a threat to Highland territory, Mara said. Yes. She thought about that. One person, moving alone through the thorn wall in the middle of the night, into territory that was not his, without the structure of his position, or the protection of his army, moving toward something he had been moving toward his entire life, apparently. He is probably already in Verad territory, Mara said. Edric spoke. Agnes translated. He says yes. He says his Western watchers reported a single traveler moving north-northeast through the lower heather about 3 hours ago. He says the traveler is moving steadily and is not stopping. North-northeast. From the western crossing. Mara worked out the direction in her head. If he had crossed at the western point and was moving north-northeast, he would reach the hold in approximately 2 hours. Everyone in the room had understood this simultaneously. She could feel it in the quality of the silence that followed Edric's last words. He is coming here, Nathan said. He does not know we are here specifically, Mara said. He is following the pull, the same way I feel it. He will go where it points him, and it was pointing him here. She could feel the direction of it, south and east, and the corresponding pressure from the north. That was the absence of something about to fill. Clara appeared in the doorway. She had been outside with Owen and had apparently been told by one of the younger Verad men what was happening. Her face had the focused expression of someone who was thinking 3 steps ahead. What do you want to do? She said. This was directed at Mara. Mara looked at her. What are my options? You could leave north before he arrives, Clara said. Move deeper into Highland territory, farther from the pull. That delays the encounter but does not prevent it. He will keep following the signal. Or, you stay, Clara said. You let him come here. You meet him on ground where you are sheltered, where Edric's people are present, where he is the visitor and you are not. Or, Mara said again, because she had the sense that Clara had not finished. Clara considered. There is a third thing, she said. You could go to him. Instead of waiting for him to arrive or running from him, you could go toward him, meet him before he reaches the hold, on the path, in the open, on ground that belongs to neither of you. Agnes was watching this exchange. Edric was watching it. The old man's expression had shifted very slightly, a quality of attention that suggested he was seeing something he had not expected. Mara thought about the 3 options. Running was not running in the same sense it had been for 3 years. It was delaying, and delaying created more opportunity for the people below the thorn wall to catch up, more opportunity for the wrong kind of completion that Agnes had described, more opportunity for everything to go badly in the particular way it would go badly if someone else reached her first and did this wrong. Waiting here meant letting him arrive on his schedule, into a place she had not chosen for this purpose, among people who had no stake in how it went. Going out to meet him meant choosing the terms. She had spent 3 years letting other people choose the terms of when she moved, where she lived, what she was called. She had accepted those terms because there was no alternative. There was an alternative now, and it required going toward the thing she had been running from, and the sensation of that was not as terrible as she had expected. It was still terrible. Just not as terrible as she had expected. She stood up. I am going out, she said. Alone. Owen said. Mara. I am going, she said. Not away. Out onto the path. Toward where he is. She looked at Agnes. Is there anything I should know before I meet him? Anything you know about him that is relevant? Agnes was quiet for a moment. I know what the histories say, which is incomplete. I know what travelers say, which is inaccurate at least in part. I know that he crossed the thorn wall alone at night, which tells you something. A man who sends others to do everything and goes nowhere himself is a particular kind of man. A man who does the thing himself, alone, in the dark, in a place that is not his. That is a different kind. She paused. I know he said his name, once, in a commission document I was able to read, in the context of what his purpose was as king. He wrote that his purpose was to protect the people of the kingdom, without distinction of blood or status. He wrote that in his own hand, not a scribe's, and he signed it. She met Mara's eyes. That is what I know. It was not nothing. Mara turned to Edric. Will you allow me to go onto your path? Agnes translated. Edric replied. Agnes said, he says the path is yours. She took her bag. She took her blade. She went out through the door of the hold into the Highland afternoon, which was cold and gray, and smelled of heather and coming rain. She did not look back at the people inside. The path north of the hold curved around a long slope of exposed rock, and then descended slightly into a shallow valley, where the heather grew taller, and the wind found less purchase. She went down into the valley and stopped in the middle of it, in a place where she could see in both directions along the path, and she stood and waited. The pull was north and east, close. She stood on the path in the highland valley with the heather around her knees and the wind moving cold, and she waited. She did not have to wait long. He appeared over the rise to the north about 10 minutes after she reached the valley, a single figure, moving at a steady pace, wearing a travel cloak that was dark and plain, and showed the signs of several days of use. He was tall. She had expected that. The stories always made that point. He moved without the self-consciousness of someone who knew they were being watched, which either meant he didn't know, or meant it had stopped mattering to him at some point, and she didn't know yet which. He saw her when he came over the rise. He stopped. She did not move. He stood at the top of the rise and looked at her from perhaps 200 feet away, and she stood in the valley and looked at him. The wind moved between them. The heather moved in it. Everything else was still. He started walking again, down the slope, toward her, at the same steady pace he had been moving at before he saw her, unhurried, not slowing, not quickening, just closing the distance in a completely unperformative way. She watched him. As he came closer, she could see more, the specific quality of exhaustion that came from traveling for a long time without proper rest, the fact that the journey had been harder than it appeared from a distance. His face, when she could see it clearly, was younger than she had expected from the stories, and more tired, and more direct in its expression. He was looking at her the way someone looked at something they had been looking for and had found in a place they had not expected. He stopped about 10 feet from her. They looked at each other. He said, "You stopped running." She said, "I came to meet you. There is a difference." He accepted that. He looked at her face with a thoroughness that was not rude but was not subtle either, the look of someone who was confirming something. "Your name is Mara," he said. "That is not your real name. It is the name I use. My name is Caius," he said. "That, at least, is real." He paused. "I know what you are. I know what this is. I want to be clear about that before anything else. I am not here because of the moon hunt. I am not here because of a tradition. And I am not here because I was told to come. I am here because I have known since I was 15 years old that something was unfinished, and I did not know what it was, and I have spent a very long time looking for it." He paused again. "I do not expect you to care about that." She looked at him. "I do not," she said, "expect you to understand what it has cost to be what I am." "No," he said, "I don't expect I do." Something about the simplicity of that was not what she had prepared herself for. The wind moved between them again. In the distance, behind him, the slope where he had appeared was empty. Just sky and heather, and the dark shape of the thorn wall to the south. He had come alone. There were no soldiers visible, no riders, nothing that suggested an organized force. "How many people know you are here?" she asked. "My general knows I left," he said. "He is extremely displeased about it. He does not know where I am." He looked at her steadily. "I am not going to take you anywhere. I want to be clear about that as well. I am not here to claim anything. I know what the bond requires, and I know that it cannot be something I decide for both of us. I came because I needed to find you. What happens next is not my decision alone." She looked at him for a long time. "There are people below the thorn wall who want to reach me first," she said, "who want to force this and break the seal rather than close it." His expression changed, not alarmed, but sharpening in the specific way of someone who has just received a piece of information that changes the shape of the problem. "How many?" he said. "At least 4. Probably more." "How far behind the thorn wall?" "They were in the cave behind the falls this morning. They may already be across." He absorbed this. "Then we do not have very much time," he said. "Not frantically, just as a fact, and I suspect you have not decided anything yet." "No," she said, "I have not." "Then tell me what you need to decide," he said, "and I will answer what I can." It was not what she had expected. She had expected the king from the stories, commanding, certain, arriving with the weight of his authority preceding him. She had expected something that felt like a wall. She was standing in front of something that felt, unexpectedly, like a door. She did not say that. But she stopped holding her shoulders as high as she had been holding them, and she looked at him, and she said, "You said you have known since you were 15 that something was unfinished. Tell me what that means." And he told her. He talked for a long time. Not in the way of someone who had been waiting to perform a speech. There was nothing prepared about it. He talked the way people talked when they were finally allowed to say something that had lived in them for years without an appropriate audience. Haltingly at first, and then with more steadiness as the telling found its shape. They sat in the heather, eventually, because standing for the length of what he had to say was not practical. She sat first, deliberately, choosing the grass rather than remaining on her feet, because remaining on her feet while he talked would have felt like a posture, and she was done performing postures. He sat across from her, at a distance that was respectful, not crowding her, with his elbows on his knees and his eyes either on the middle distance or on her face, depending on what he was saying. At 15, he told her, there had been a day. Not a dramatic one. Not a moment in a throne room or a confrontation or a revelation. Just a day in late autumn when he was sitting in his father's study. His father had been king then, still alive, still the one in the chair, and he had been allowed to look through the historical records that kings kept for their successors, the ones that were separate from the official archives, passed down generation to generation in a locked chest that each king opened only once, when his heir was old enough to understand what was in it. His father had sat beside him while he read. The records were not complete. He said this immediately, with a precision that told her he had spent a great deal of time since then understanding the shape of what was missing. They had clearly been edited, at some point, passages removed, certain names replaced with neutral terms, the parts that reflected badly on the throne reduced to bare outlines, but even reduced to bare outlines, the shape of what had happened was visible. The war, the covenant, the bloodline that had been hidden. And at the center of the records, a statement written by his great-grandfather, not the one who had started the war, but the one after, the one who had inherited the consequences, that said plainly, the obligation of this throne to the covenant bloodline is not erased by the war. The obligation remains. The completion of the bond is the duty of this house, whenever the bloodline is found, and the completion must be by consent on both sides or it serves nothing. He had read that statement at 15, and he had looked at his father. His father had said, "It is why we continue the search." Not the moon hunt, he said. The moon hunt was a tradition, a public one, and it served its purpose. But what he was looking for was different, and his father had known it was different, and his grandfather before that, each one passing the knowledge to the next along with the locked chest, the obligation, and the particular specific inability to close the thing that lived in their chest, that wanted to be whole. He called it an incompleteness, Caius said. My father. He said it was not quite a feeling, and not quite a physical sensation, more like the way a room feels when you know something is missing from it, but you cannot immediately see what. Yes, Mara said. He looked at her. I know that feeling, she said. I have been calling it something else for 3 years. Anxiety. Vigilance. I told myself it was the nervousness of someone always waiting to be found. But it was not directional when I was afraid. It was directional toward a specific thing. He was very still. South and slightly east, she said. Every day since I have had words for directions. He looked at the ground for a moment. When he looked back up, his expression had the quality of someone who has just had something very large confirmed that they had been quietly keeping in the category of things they were not entirely sure of. North and slightly west, he said. For me, every day. Getting stronger when I was still, and quieter when I was in motion. Yes, she said. That exactly. They sat for a moment in the heather, with that between them. Two people who had spent years navigating by a pull they did not understand toward each other, arriving in a highland valley on a cold gray afternoon, still not understanding all of it, but understanding more than they had. Your grandfather started the war, she said. Yes, he said. There was no deflection in it, no qualifier, no attempt to reframe. He tried to take the bond by force, and it destroyed everything it touched. Yes, he said again. And it killed people. Many people. Including people who had nothing to do with the covenant, and nothing to gain from any of it. He wanted what the bond carried, and he was not able to wait for it, and he was not able to accept the terms it required. He paused. My father spent his life trying to understand what his grandfather had done, and why, and I spent my childhood watching my father try to live with the inheritance of it. He looked at her. I am not going to tell you that makes it better. I am not going to tell you that my family's regret undoes what happened. I know it does not. No, she said, it doesn't. Then I will not pretend it does. He held her gaze without flinching. I can only tell you what I am, which is not him, and what I am trying to do, which is different from what he did. She had been watching him carefully the entire time he spoke, not just listening to the words but watching the way he said them, the specific quality of how a person's face changed when they were performing honesty versus when they were simply being honest. She had spent 3 years reading strangers in 30-second interactions, learning to trust her read, and she was reading him now. He believed what he was saying. That did not mean he was right about all of it. People who were wrong believed what they were saying too, often more strongly than people who were right, but there was a difference in kind between someone who had thought through the difficulty of their position and was saying something they had arrived at through that thought, and someone who was saying what they had been taught to say. He was the first kind. Agnes told me, she said, that the blight began because the seal was not completed within a certain time, that it is a consequence, that it will get worse. Yes, he said. I have been watching it on the eastern borders for 3 years. I sent investigators the first year, thinking it was a disease, something that could be quarantined. They could not identify it. The second year I sent my best healers. They could not treat it. By the third year, the settlements at the eastern edges it was not the same as a sickness. It was something else, something in the pack bonds themselves fraying, people not dying but becoming less themselves. She thought about the village she had passed through, the wolves at the edge of their own community. And you knew it was connected to the Covenant? She said. I suspected it, he said. The records mentioned that the Covenant had been built as a response to something, a preventative. When the blight appeared, I went back to the records and the connection was there, not explicit but visible between the lines. He paused. I told no one what I believed, because saying it aloud would have required explaining that my great-grandfather's war was the direct cause of a blight that was now destroying the very people he was supposed to protect. She thought about the weight of carrying that. She thought about the weight of carrying what she had been carrying, and she found that despite everything, the two weights were not entirely unlike each other, not in origin, not in size, not in the complicated ways that the history of other people's decisions became the architecture of your own life without your permission. The people below the thorn wall, she said. Agnes believes she knows who sent them. She won't say until she is certain. Do you know? He was quiet for a moment. I have a belief about it, he said. Tell me. He looked at the far edge of the valley. There are people in the kingdom, advisors, senior council members, who have known about the Covenant situation for as long as anyone with access to the royal records has known. Some of them have the interests of the kingdom at heart and have supported the search for the bloodline because they understand what the blight is. But others, he stopped. Others have interests that are not the kingdom's interests, who see the disruption the blight is causing as an opportunity to shift power structures that have been in place for generations. If the blight were weaponized rather than ended, if the seal were broken in the wrong way. The unraveling, Mara said. He looked at her sharply. You know about the unraveling. Agnes told me. His expression tightened. How much does Agnes know? Everything, Mara said. Possibly more than the records do. She was a healer for the Covenant before the war. She watched his face. She has been looking for me for 11 years. He was quiet for a moment. Is she here? Yes, at the hold. I would like to speak with her. He paused. With your permission. The phrase was careful, and she noticed it. He was not asking whether he could speak with Agnes. Agnes was a free person who could be spoken with or not, according to her own preference. He was asking Mara whether she was comfortable with that conversation happening. It was a small thing. It registered. She is cautious, Mara said. She will say less than you want her to. That is fine, he said. What she says will still be more than what I have. The cold was coming in stronger now. The sky above the highlands going from gray to something darker. The particular shade that meant rain was not far off. She had noticed the change, and she saw that he had noticed it too. The same instinctive read of weather that came from spending time outdoors. There is something I need to tell you, she said, before we go anywhere or decide anything. He waited. I have spent 3 years building a set of rules for myself, she said. Rules about trusting people, about staying in one place, about saying my name, about going toward things versus away from them. I built those rules because they kept me alive, and they did keep me alive. But some of them were also about control, about the feeling of having something I could manage, when the actual situation I was in, the bloodline, the seal, all of it, was entirely outside my control from the moment I was born. She paused. I am not going to dissolve all of those rules because you sat in the heather and told me the truth about your family, and I found it credible. I am cautious and I will remain cautious, not because I distrust you specifically, but because caution is currently the most important thing I have. Yes, he said. But I am also not going to run anymore, she said. Not in the way I have been running. Not because I am afraid of you catching me, but because running was never going to solve the blight, and the blight is the actual problem. He looked at her with the expression of someone receiving information they had not expected and were trying to absorb accurately. What are you saying? he said. Precisely. I am saying I will talk, she said, here, and at the hold, and as long as it takes for me to understand what I am choosing and what it means. And then I will choose. And my choice will be what it is. I am not promising you a particular outcome. He was quiet. Is that acceptable? She said. Yes, he said, and there was something in it that was more than agreement, a quality of something held for a long time being put down carefully. She stood up from the heather. He stood too. They were roughly the same height in this moment, though he was taller by an inch or two. She had been right about that. The heather was at both their knees, and the cold wind moved through it, and behind them the path led north, toward the hold, and behind him the path led south, toward the thorn wall, and below the thorn wall the people who had been following her were somewhere in the mist. There is something else, he said. Something I should tell you now rather than later. Tell me. When I left my army at the south edge of the Ren Forest and came north alone, I told my general I was pursuing a lead in the Claiming Moon search, which was technically accurate, but I left orders. He paused. I left orders for my general to send a specific message to a specific person if I did not return within 4 days. That person would then take a specific action. He looked at her carefully. My general does not know what the message says or who it goes to. But it is an instruction that is activated by my absence, and it is relevant to the people below the thorn wall. She looked at him. You set something in motion before you came alone into enemy territory. Highlands are not enemy territory. Before you came alone into territory that is not yours, she amended. Yes, he said, because I knew what following the pull might mean in terms of where I would end up and in what condition. And I wanted something to happen if I did not come back. Something that would not undo what the wrong people might do to the seal, but that would limit the damage. Who does the message go to? He told her. She had not expected that name. It was not a name from the kingdom, not a council member or an army officer. It was a name from the Highlands, a Highland name, a name that suggested he had been operating in the Highlands long enough to know who to trust there, which meant he had been preparing for this possibility for much longer than she had realized. He had been thinking about this the same way she had, preparing for the ways things could go wrong, planning for exits he hoped not to need. She stood in the heather and looked at him and thought, we are not the same. We come from entirely different things, we carry entirely different histories, and the specific weight of what sits between us is not something that sentiment or attraction or the pull of an ancient bond resolves neatly. But we are not entirely unlike each other either. Come to the hold, she said. Speak with Agnes, speak with Edric. Let us understand together what we have and what we do not have, and what needs to happen next. She paused. And then we will talk again. He nodded. She turned and walked north on the path toward the hold. He walked beside her, not in front, not at a safe distance, just beside her, at the natural pace that two people fell into when they were walking the same direction. She was aware of the pull, which had been south and east for 3 years. It was simply beside her now. Not resolved, not completed, just present. In a way it had not been before, close enough that the distance between them was gone, and what remained was the actual thing, which was complicated and heavy and real, and neither of them pretended otherwise. They walked north through the heather as the first rain of the evening began to fall, quiet and cold, and the highlands settled into gray around them, and the hold appeared on the rise ahead, its low stone shape patient and solid against the sky. Agnes was standing at the doorway when they arrived. She looked at Caius for a long moment. He looked at her. She said something in the Covenant's old tongue. He replied in it, haltingly, but comprehensibly, the accent of someone who had learned a language from old texts rather than from speech. The words correct, but the rhythm slightly off. Agnes's expression changed at the sound of it. Not softened exactly. Rearranged. She stepped aside from the doorway. They went in out of the rain. Inside, Edric looked at Caius. Caius looked at Edric. Owen put his hand on Clara's shoulder, whether to reassure her or himself was unclear. Nathan had his maps out on the floor and was looking at them with the focused expression of someone thinking about routes. Agnes said to the room, "We have very little time." She looked at Caius. "Tell me what you know. I will tell you what I know. Between the two of us, we will find what is missing, and then we will all understand what needs to happen." She sat. He sat. And in a low-ceilinged highland room with rain coming down outside and fire burning steady at the center of it, they began to fill in the pieces that each of them had been given, and the other had been denied, and the shape of it, as it emerged, was larger than either of them had known. The people below the thorn wall were still coming. The moon rose in 5 days. And for the first time since any of this had begun, the right people were in the same room. Agnes and Caius talked for 6 hours. Not continuously. They stopped for water, stopped when the fire needed tending, stopped twice because Edric had a question he passed through Agnes for her to translate, and once because Clara interrupted the whole thing with a pointed and extremely relevant observation that changed the direction of the conversation for nearly an hour. But they talked, and the information moved between them, and the room listened. Mara listened most carefully. She learned things she had not known. She learned things she had suspected but not been able to confirm. And she learned one thing that neither Agnes nor Caius had known individually, that she had not known either, and that became clear only when their two pieces were placed beside each other and the gap between them became visible. The seal, the thing the covenant had built and the thing the bond was supposed to complete, was not, as she had understood it, a single action. It was not a moment. It was not something that happened at a specific point in time and was then done. It was ongoing. It was something that had to be maintained, the way a fire had to be maintained, the way water had to be kept moving or it went still, and became something other than what it was meant to be. Agnes had understood this, she said, but had not had the language for it. The specific mechanism had been described to her in the old tongue in a way that she had translated as completion, when the better word she now realized was continuation. Caius had known something different, that the records in the Royal Archive described the bond as a living obligation, not a historical one. He had understood that as meaning the obligation continued across generations, that each king was obligated to seek the bloodline, but he had not understood until Agnes said the word continuation, that what continued was the bond itself, not just the search for it. When they put those two pieces together, the third piece emerged. The blight was not simply getting worse because the seal had not been completed, it was getting worse because the seal was an active thing, and an active thing that had not been sustained for 30 years was not merely paused. It was unraveling, slowly, but with increasing speed. The blight was the evidence of that unraveling made visible in the world. And the unraveling had a rate. Caius knew the rate because the royal records tracked the blight's spread with the thoroughness of people who understood its connection to the throne's obligation, even if they had never said so publicly. Agnes knew what the rate meant because the Covenant's own records, which she had memorized in the years before the war, had described what the unraveling looked like at each stage. They were in the 3rd stage of 5. The 4th stage was irreversible. They had, Agnes calculated, based on the rate and the stage, approximately 1 season before the 4th stage began, possibly less, certainly not more. 1 season. The moon rose in 5 days. Mara sat with all of this. She had known the broad shape of the situation before tonight, but the broad shape and the specific shape were not the same thing, and the specific shape was that if nothing was done within 1 season, the unraveling would reach a point where completing the bond would not stop it. The blight would be permanent, what it was turning wolves into would be permanent, and the thing that the unraveling released, the deep thing that the seal had been built to contain, would eventually come loose on its own without anyone needing to break it. That changed the calculation. Before tonight, there was a theoretical version of the situation in which she decided not to complete the bond, and the blight continued to worsen, but the world continued to exist in a damaged form, perhaps indefinitely. In that version, not deciding was a choice with consequences she could outline. After tonight, not deciding was still a choice, but its consequences had a timeline attached, and the timeline was 1 season. After the room had been quiet for a long time, Edric spoke. Agnes translated. He says he has known the eastern boundary has been losing ground for 3 years. He says he could not explain what was taking it. He says now that he understands the shape of it, he understands also that the Highland clans will not be exempt. The unraveling does not stop at the Thornwall. She paused. He says that if the completion of the bond requires a place, a specific location, conditions or circumstances, he has the authority to provide that within Verret territory. Everyone looked at Agnes. Agnes said, "The Covenant's records describe the conditions for the completion. They require the 2 people, free choice, and, this is the part I have been carrying for a long time without knowing what to do with, they require the falls." She looked at Mara. The Veyrath Falls specifically. The original sealing ceremony was performed there. The Covenant records say the falls carry a residual energy from the original ceremony, and that the completion, to be fully effective, should be performed in the same place. "The falls," Caius said. "Yes," Agnes said. "Which are currently in the mist zone," Mara said, "with at least 4 people in or near them who want to prevent the completion." "Yes," Agnes said again. There was a silence. Nathan, who had been listening from his spot on the floor with his maps, said, "We know roughly where they are. We know they entered the mist this morning. We know they found the cave. We do not know whether they have found the passage out." He looked at the maps. "If they have not found the passage, if they are still searching the cave or the mist zone, we could reach the falls before they come over the thorn wall. Going back the way we came," Owen said, "over the thorn wall, through the passage, into the mist." "In the dark," Clara said, "which is actually an advantage. The mist removes scent and visual tracking. In the dark, it also removes sight almost entirely. We know the passage, they don't." She was looking at Mara. She was looking at the fire. She had been looking at the fire for most of the past 5 minutes because she was doing the thing she did when she was making a decision that she needed to make correctly. She was looking at something calm and continuous and letting her mind run through the considerations without grabbing at any of them prematurely. She thought about the village with the wolves at the edge of their own community. She thought about Agnes sitting in a cave for a night with water on her knees, waiting, having spent 11 years trying to reach a point where this conversation could happen. She thought about her mother, who had spent 14 years keeping her alive and educated and hidden, and who had written her name on a strip of cloth over and over in the script of the people who had been destroyed, so that she could exist, so that she could be here, so that there was a there to be here at. She thought about the feeling of the pull going south and east every day for 3 years, and how it felt right now, sitting in the same room as the thing it had been pointing toward, which was strange and not resolved and not simple but was present, real in a way that the absence of it had never been. She stood up. "I want to say something," she said. The room was quiet. She looked at Caius. "I have not decided about the completion. I want to be clear about that. The decision is mine and I am still making it, but I understand now what the timeline is, and I understand what not deciding means in terms of what happens." She looked around the room, Owen and Clara, Nathan, Edric and his 2 men, Agnes. "I am going to the falls. Tonight, while the dark and the mist give us the best chance of getting there before the people who are coming over the thorn wall." She looked at Caius last. "You can come, or you can wait here. The decision I am going to make at the falls is not something I can make at a distance, and I am not going to try. I need to be there." She paused. "But I am not going to have that conversation with people standing between us trying to stop it from happening. So we go now, or the timeline runs out some other way." He was already on his feet. Nathan was folding his maps. Owen had his hand on Clara's arm and was speaking quietly to her, quickly. Clara was shaking her head, and then she stopped shaking it, and the 2 of them exchanged a look that had years of knowing each other in it, and Owen straightened and nodded. Agnes said, to Edric, something brief and direct. Edric replied. Agnes turned to the room. "Edric will send 2 of his people with us to the Thornwall crossing. After the crossing they will turn back. The falls are below the Thornwall and below the mist, and that is not their place to follow. But they will ensure no one else crosses behind us." "No one?" Caius said. "He says no one who comes from the south this night will find the crossing passable," Agnes said. "He does not specify how." Edric met Caius's eyes and said something directly to him, in the old tongue, with the deliberate slowness of someone who wanted to be sure they were understood. Caius listened. His expression did not change, but something behind it did, a quality of attention sharpening to something close to surprise. He replied in the old tongue, short and clear. Mara asked Agnes quietly, "What did he say?" Agnes said, "He said the obligation of your house is known here. It has been known here longer than your kingdom has existed." He said, "Go and do what your house should have done 30 years ago." Caius had heard Agnes translate it. He looked at Edric. "I will," he said. Edric nodded once, with the weight of someone completing a very old piece of business that had been sitting unfinished for most of their life. They left the hold in 2 groups, Edric's 2 riders going first, ranging ahead to scout the path to the Thornwall crossing, and then the others, moving fast and quiet in the dark, the rain from earlier having cleared and left the air crystalline and cold. They crossed the Thornwall in the dark. It was different going down than it had been going up. The descent was technically easier on the muscles but harder on the nerves, the loose rock wanting to slide, the footholds less reliable in the dark. Nathan went first with a shielded lamp, Clara behind him, then Agnes with Owen's hand available to her though she did not take it, then Mara, then Caius last. On the southern side of the Thornwall, Edric's 2 riders turned back without a word. They went back up the slope and over the ridge and vanished into the darkness above, and after that there was just the path and the dark and the 5 of them moving south. The mist reached them before they expected it. It came up the slope from the valley, moving in the quiet way it always moved, filling the spaces between the trees, erasing edges. The scent disruption hit Mara the way it had the first time. Sudden, total, a blankness where sense had been. She heard Caius stop behind her, heard him breathe. It removes everything, he said. Not a complaint, observation. Yes, she said. Stay close. The sound of the falls will guide us. They moved through the mist. No one spoke. The falls grew louder by degrees, the way the falls always did, not gradually but in increments, each increment larger than the last, until it was not a sound at all but an environment they were moving through, a world made of water sound that covered everything else. The cave entrance appeared as a darker shape in the white of the mist. Mara went through the curtain of water first. The cave was not empty. The lamp she had left on the floor when they went through the back passage was still burning. She had not expected that, had not thought it would last this long, but it was still going, the flame low and steady. And beside the lamp, sitting with her back against the cave wall, in the position of someone who had been there a long time, and was prepared to be there longer, was a figure. Mara had the blade out before she finished taking in what she was seeing. Then she finished taking in what she was seeing. The figure by the lamp was not one of the hunters. It was a girl, perhaps 16, wrapped in a travel cloak, with dark, close-cropped hair and wide eyes that were currently fixed on the blade with the calm of someone who had decided not to panic about things she could not control. Please don't, the girl said, in a voice that was young but not frightened. I have been in this cave for 6 hours and I am extremely cold, and I would very much like this to resolve itself peacefully. Clara came through the curtain of water behind Mara. The girl's face changed entirely. Clara, she said. Nell, Clara said, and whatever operational composure she had been operating with for the past 2 days broke open for just a moment, the way it broke when Owen had said her name in the cave the first time. She crossed to the girl and the two of them held on to each other briefly, fiercely. Owen came through the water and made a sound that was not quite a word. She is my friend, Clara said, stepping back. I told her about the falls when I saw her on the road north. I ran into her the morning I left. I told her where I was going. I did not think she would follow. I followed, Nell said. She looked around the cave at the assembled group, Nathan, Agnes, Mara, and then Caius, who had come through the water last. Her eyes stayed on Caius for a moment with the expression of someone running a rapid inventory of a situation. You are the king, she said. Yes, he said. You are much younger than the official portraits suggest. Official portraits tend toward flattery, he said. Or the opposite, she said. In this case, the opposite. She looked at Agnes. You are the healer, the one the stories mention. Agnes raised an eyebrow. Nell said, I read everything I could find about the Covenant after Clara told me what she was. I found 4 sources. You were mentioned in 2 of them. What did they say? Agnes asked. That you were very determined, Nell said, and that you had extremely good judgment about who to trust. Agnes looked at Mara. Mara looked at Nell. Were there others in this cave when you arrived? Yes, Nell said. 2 people. They were searching the back wall. I was in the passage you came through. I had found it and gone partway in and then heard them coming, so I stayed in the passage. They searched for the exit for a long time and could not find it. Then they left back through the water and I heard them talking outside, in the mist, about going back to report and getting more people. More people, Caius said. Yes. Nell looked at him steadily. They said they needed more people, and that the passage they were looking for probably came out above the mist line, and that they needed someone who knew that ground. Someone who knew the highland ground above the mist. Someone who had either been there before or had maps of it. Nathan made a sound. Everyone looked at him. His face had gone careful. I showed my maps to Edric's men last night, he said. In the hold. I thought they were interested and I thought it was natural interest. I did not think about. They would not have sent information to anyone below the thorn wall, Mara said. No, he agreed. But if someone was watching and saw the maps. Caius said. How many people were in the hold when you showed them? Nathan thought. 6, 7. The 2 riders, the 2 who were with Edric, Edric himself, and the woman who brought us water. The woman, Caius said. Agnes was already looking at him. You know her. I do not know her specifically, he said. But the description fits someone who has been operating in the Highland border region for 2 years, gathering information, someone my general has tried to identify and failed. He paused. Someone who works for the person Agnes believes sent the people below the thorn wall. If she was in the hold last night, then she has seen Nathan's maps, Mara said. And she has sent word. And more people are coming. Not by tonight, but by dawn. There was a very short silence. Then we do not have until morning, Mara said. She looked at Caius. He looked at her. She had not made her decision yet. She had said she would make it at the falls, and she had meant it. She had not been performing decisiveness. She genuinely did not yet know. But she was standing at the falls, and the water was enormous around them, and Agnes was here, and the mist was doing what the mist did, and by dawn there would be more of the wrong people with the wrong intentions, and the wrong understanding of what this was supposed to be. Agnes, she said, what do I need to know about how this works? Specifically. All of it, Agnes told her. She listened. When Agnes was done, she stood in the cave with the lamp burning low, and the falls behind everything, and the people she had gathered around herself in 3 days of running looking at her, and she thought about what she was being asked to choose and what the choosing meant. Not the world. She was not capable of thinking in terms of the world, and she did not trust anyone who was. She thought smaller than that. She thought about the village with the wolves at the edge of their own community. She thought about Leonard, who could not lie. She thought about Pip, who was braver than his sister, and Clara, who was smarter than anyone gave her credit for. She thought about her mother, who had kept her alive for 14 years, and had written her name on a strip of cloth so that the name would not be lost. She thought about the pool, which was right beside her. She turned to face it. She looked at Caius. He looked back at her, very still, waiting. I am going to ask you one question, she said, and I need your honest answer, not the answer that is helpful. Yes, he said. If I said no, she said. If I said I have heard all of this, and I understand all of it, and I am still saying no, what would you do? He was quiet for a moment. Genuinely quiet, not performing consideration. I would respect that, he said, and then I would spend whatever time remained trying to find another solution, and I would probably not find one, and the blight would do what it was going to do. He paused. I am not going to pretend that I don't want you to say yes. I am not going to pretend that I don't understand what is at stake. But what I want and what is at stake do not change what you have the right to decide. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Agnes. Agnes looked back at her with the expression of someone who had spent 11 years getting to this room and was now, with extraordinary effort, keeping their own desire for a particular outcome entirely out of their face. Mara turned back to the falls. She watched the water fall for a long moment, continuous and enormous, the same water it had always been, carrying the old ceremony in it the way water carried everything it had ever touched. She turned back around. Not no, she said. The cave was very quiet. Tell me what we have to do, she said to Agnes, and let's do it before dawn. Agnes told them what to do in the way she did everything, directly, without softening the parts that were difficult, or elaborating the parts that were simple. The completion of the bond did not require ceremony in the theatrical sense. There were no words to recite in a specific order, no objects to hold, no symbols to draw. The Covenant's records were explicit on this point, Agnes said, because the founders had been concerned about people confusing the form with the function, about people going through the motions without the substance and believing they had done something when they had not. The substance was everything. The form was nothing. The substance was this. The two people stood at the falls, in the mist, which was the place where the original seal had been placed, and where the residual energy of it still lived in the water. They spoke the truth, not a specific truth, not a prescribed statement, but their own truth, whatever it actually was, without concealment. And then they extended toward each other the specific thing each of them carried, the bloodline's keeper on one side, the throne's half of the seal on the other, and let those two things recognize each other. Not force, not will, recognize. What does recognize mean in practice? Nathan asked, from the edge of the cave where he and Owen and Clara and Nell had arranged themselves with the quiet efficiency of people who understood they were present for something important, and needed to take up as little space as possible while being present for it. Agnes said, it means they stop holding it apart. Every person who carries something like this, the bloodline, the throne's obligation, learns over a lifetime to protect it, to contain it, not to let it be seen or felt by anything outside themselves. Because if you let it be visible, you are vulnerable. She looked at Mara and then at Caius. The completion requires letting it be visible, to each other, at the same time. She paused. The founders described it as the most difficult thing they ever asked anyone to do, and they were aware that they were asking it of people who had very good reasons not to trust each other. A short silence. How do we know when it has worked? Caius said. Agnes said, you will know. She did not elaborate on that. Mara got the sense that elaborating would not have added anything useful. Owen said, from his place at the cave wall, what do we do? Agnes turned to the group. You stay here, she said. The bond does not require witnesses. It requires the two people, and the place, and the choice. You are here as, she considered the word, as witnesses in the larger sense, as the people who came with this, and who will carry what comes after it out into the world. Clara looked at Mara. Are you ready? Mara looked at her. The girl had been asking her that question, in various forms, since the first morning in the cave. Not pushing, not managing, just asking. With the directness of someone who believed that readiness was something you could assess accurately, if you asked honestly. I will tell you when it is done, Mara said. Clara nodded, satisfied. Mara and Caius went to the edge of the cave, to the curtain of falling water. Not through it yet, standing at the threshold. Outside the water, the mist moved in its slow, aimless way. The basin was dark. It was well past midnight now, the darkness complete except for the faint gray luminescence of the mist itself, the way water in motion produced its own dim light. I want to say something, Caius said quietly, before they went through. Not to the room, to her. She waited. I have been moving toward this for 15 years, he said, and I have imagined it in that time. In the way you imagine things you are moving toward and do not know. I imagined it as a transaction mostly, as something that would be accomplished. I did not imagine, he paused. I did not imagine that the person would be someone I would need to convince myself to trust at the same speed I was being convinced of. I did not imagine that part. The convincing yourself part, she said. Yes, he said. I wanted to tell you that I am also doing that. Not just you. She thought about that. It doesn't resolve anything, she said. No, he said. But it seemed honest. It is honest, she said. She went through the curtain of water. The cold of it hit her immediately. Not uncomfortable, just complete. The way the mist made everything complete, filling all the senses with its white absence. She heard him come through behind her, heard the slight sound he made at the cold of the water, and then they were standing on the flat rock outside the cave, in the basin of the falls, in the mist that was not quite darkness, and not quite light. The falls were immense from here. Directly in front of them, falling from the ridge above in a continuous white wall, louder than thought, louder than anything that was not itself. The spray was everywhere, on her face and hands and in her hair, cold and constant. She thought about the Covenant's original ceremony, about the people who had stood here 400 years ago and done what she was about to do, with the same difficulty and the same weight and probably more fear, because they were doing it for the first time, without knowing if it would work, without anyone who had come before them to say, yes, this is real, this is what it does. She faced the falls. Agnes said, she said, loudly enough to be heard over the water, that we speak the truth, our own truth, whatever it actually is. Yes, he said. He was standing beside her, close enough that she could hear him without him raising his voice more than necessary. I will go first, she said, not because she was braver, because she was the one who had spent 3 years running from this, and going first was the appropriate way to stop. She thought about what her own truth was, not the truth about the bloodline or the seal or the blight. Those were facts, and facts were not what Agnes had meant. Agnes had meant the truth that was harder than facts, the kind you spent years not saying because saying it made you responsible for it. She thought about what she had been carrying for 3 years that was not the bag on her back. I was afraid, she said, to the falls. Not of being found, specifically. I was afraid that if I stopped running and let myself exist in one place, one real place, with a real name and a real life, I would find out that I had been shaped entirely by running, that there was no person left under the 3 years of survival, that I had gotten so good at not being anywhere, that I had made myself into nothing. She paused. The spray was cold on her face. That was the fear, not the king, not the hunters, not the bond. The fear was that I had already lost myself before anyone could take me. She stopped. The falls fell. She felt something in her chest move, not dramatically, the way ice moves in spring water, at first barely perceptible, the slow shifting of something that has been fixed for a long time, and is finding that it does not have to stay fixed. Caius said after a moment, I was afraid that I was my grandfather. Not that I would do what he did. I knew enough about what he did to know I would not, could not, would not allow myself to. But the fear was different than that. The fear was that the fact of what he did had corrupted something at the root of everything I was supposed to be. That a throne built on that kind of wrong could not produce something right, regardless of who was sitting in it. He paused. That I was trying to repair something that was too broken at the foundation to be repaired. That finding the bloodline and completing the bond would not be restoration. That it would just be more of the same, in a different arrangement. The water fell between them and the world. She turned her head and looked at him. He was looking at the falls. He looked different than he had in the valley. Not less himself, more, in a way. Because the thing that people performed in public had been stripped off by the cold and the dark and the spray and the truth he had just said. And what was underneath it was someone who was genuinely uncertain and was saying so and was standing here anyway. Neither of those fears is resolved, she said. No, he said. But we are here anyway. Yes. She turned back to the falls. She reached inside herself for the thing she had always held carefully apart, at the edge of her own perception, never letting it be visible because visible meant vulnerable, and vulnerable was the one thing she could not afford. She had carried it like something hot in her hands that she could not put down and could not hold for long. She let herself feel it clearly. It was not what she had expected. She had expected it to feel like power, in the way that word usually meant, something that overwhelmed, something that imposed itself. It did not feel like that. It felt like a completed shape, like the word that had been on the tip of her tongue for 3 years suddenly being findable, like a question she had been carrying, that had an answer she had just found in a place she had not thought to look. And it was not just hers. She felt the other half of it, not abstractly, not as a concept, but specifically, the way you felt the specific presence of another person in a dark room, the warmth and weight and reality of them. She felt the thing that lived in him reaching toward the thing that lived in her, not with pressure, not with demand, but with the quality of something that had been incomplete for a very long time, and had finally found what it was incomplete without. She let it. That was all. She did not do anything. She stopped holding it apart. The falls changed. Not the sound, not the water, but something about them shifted, the way the quality of light shifts when a cloud moves off the sun. Not darker, not brighter, but different, more of what it already was, itself in a more complete way. The mist, which had been moving in its usual aimless drift, began to move in a specific direction, inward, toward the falls, as if something at the center of the water was drawing it. She heard Caius make a sound that was not a word. The light, whatever light existed in this place, the gray luminescence of the mist and the moving water, brightened, not to daylight, not to anything that could be called illumination, but enough to see clearly, the rock beneath their feet and the curtain of water before them and each other. She looked at him. He looked at her. His expression was something she did not have a word for. She had seen surprise, and she had seen relief, and she had seen the particular look of someone who has just been confirmed in something they were afraid to hope. His expression was not quite any of those things, but it contained all of them, and something else, something that was very quiet and very complete, and did not need to be named. She felt the seal close, not with force, with completion. The way a door closes when you do not slam it but simply ease it shut, the latch finding the catch, the click barely audible. And in the closing, something else. A sound in the distance, or not a sound but the opposite of a sound, a silence that had not been there before, where there had previously been something ongoing and wrong. She could not name the thing that had been ongoing and wrong, could not say exactly what it sounded like when it was present, because she had lived with it so long it had become background. But she could feel its absence, could feel the specific quality of a thing that had been unraveling coming to rest. Not healed, not immediately, not all at once, but arrested, stopped. The way a crack in a wall stopped spreading when the weight above it was redistributed. The damage already done was still there, but the damage was no longer accumulating. She felt Caius exhale beside her. She exhaled too. With the mist continued to move toward the water, drawn by whatever had shifted. They stood in it, in the spray, in the dark that was fractionally less dark, and they did not speak for a long time. Then she said, "How do you feel?" He said, "Like something I have been carrying has been put down." He paused, "And also like I am standing in a waterfall at 1 a.m. in someone else's country." She did not laugh, but the muscles in her face did something adjacent to it, something that was not quite a laugh but was in the same country as one. "We should go back in," she said. "Yes," he said. They turned and went back through the curtain of the falls. Inside the cave, the lamp was still burning. The others were where they had been, Owen and Clara together, Nell beside Clara, Nathan with his hands folded on his maps, Agnes very still against the cave wall. Agnes looked at them when they came through the water. Her eyes moved from Mara's face to Caius's and back. She said nothing. She did not need to. Clara said, "Did it work?" "Yes," Mara said. "How do you know?" Agnes said we would know, Mara said. She was right. Clara nodded, satisfied, in the way she accepted all satisfactory answers. Owen stood up. He looked at Caius with the expression of a man who was standing in the presence of an alpha king in a cave behind a waterfall, and was doing his level best to respond to this situation appropriately. "Sir," he said. "Owen," Caius said, because Mara had told him Owen's name during the walk back to the falls, along with Clara's and Nathan's and Nell's. "Thank you for getting your daughter to the falls." Owen looked at Clara. Clara made an expression that suggested she had gotten herself to the falls and wanted the record to reflect this. "Thank you for being here," Owen said. Nell was watching Caius with the unabashed analytical attention she applied to everything. "The blight," she said. "What happens to it now?" "It stops spreading," Agnes said. "What already exists will take time. Months, possibly longer. The people who have been affected will not recover overnight. Some may not fully recover, but it will not get worse." "And the people below the thorn wall," Nathan said. "They were coming for something that no longer needs to be taken. Does that change their situation?" Caius said. "Yes." He said it in the way of a man who was thinking about a specific set of people, and a specific set of consequences. "When I return, and I will return, I need to return. There are things that need to be addressed directly and in public. The people who sent the group outside will not be able to claim they did not know what they were doing. The intention was clear enough that it constitutes a very specific category of wrong, and that category has consequences." He paused. "I will deal with it." "You are going back to the kingdom," Mara said. It was not a question. "Yes," he said. He looked at her. "After we are out of this cave and out of the mist, and somewhere that the people outside it cannot reach us." He paused. "What are you going to do?" She thought about it. She thought about Valehaven, which she could not go back to, not because it was dangerous but because it was a place she had been hiding in, and she was not hiding anymore. And going back to a place you hid in when you were no longer hiding was just living somewhere unfamiliar and small. She thought about the road she had taken out of it, the path through the Wren forest, the old road that ended in the middle of the forest. She thought about the strip of cloth in her bag, the name on it, the name she had not said aloud in 3 years. "I am going to go somewhere," she said. "Somewhere I have not been yet. Somewhere I choose because I want to be there, not because it is safe, or because I can disappear in it." She looked at him. "And then I am going to decide what comes after that." He held her gaze. "And I will be where I am," he said, "when you decide." Not pressing, not directing, just placing himself in the sentence as a piece of information, available. "Yes," she said. Agnes said, "We should move. The people outside the mist will have sent word by now. Dawn is 3 hours away." They moved. They went out through the back of the cave, through the passage, up through the crack in the rock, and onto the slope above the mist. The sky above the thorn wall was still dark but beginning to have the quality of sky that was thinking about becoming something else. They went up over the thorn wall, harder by night but manageable with Nathan's lamp and the knowledge of the path, and into the highlands. Edric's people met them at the top of the crossing. 2 figures, quiet and efficient, who had clearly been at their post all night and would be there until they were not needed. They said nothing, but moved with them long enough to ensure they were above the mist zone and clear of the crossing. Then they turned back. On the highland side of the thorn wall, 5 days before the claiming moon, in the dark hour before dawn, 6 people stood on a path in the heather and breathed. Owen had his arm around Clara. Clara allowed this. Nell was beside Clara, close enough to be within reach. Nathan had his maps under his arm. Agnes was standing very straight, the way she always stood, the way someone stood who had spent 11 years in motion and had not yet decided to stop. Caius was standing slightly apart, looking south, which was where he needed to go. Mara stood where the path branched, north toward Edric's Hold, south toward the thorn wall, east toward the dawn that was starting to become visible at the very edge of the sky. She reached into her bag. She took out the strip of cloth. She unfolded it. In the growing gray of the pre-dawn light, she looked at the marks on it, and for the first time in her life she could read them, because Agnes had translated them the previous night, and she had read the translation until it was part of her. The marks said her name, her real one, her mother's name for her, the one she had not said aloud in 3 years. She said it, quietly, not to anyone specifically, just into the air of the highland morning, into the sound of the wind in the heather. Owen looked at her. Agnes closed her eyes for a moment. Caius had turned from where he was looking south. The way he was looking at her had the quality of someone seeing something clearly that they had been looking at sideways for a very long time. She folded the cloth and put it back in her bag. "Go south," she said to him. "Yes," he said. "Finish what needs to be finished there." "Yes." She looked at him one more time. The dawn was beginning in earnest now. the edge of the sky going from gray to pale gold, the kind of light that made the heather look like something entirely different from what it was in the dark. "I know where to find you," she said, "when I am ready." He looked at her with the expression that she had not had words for in the cave, the one that was not quite surprise and not quite relief and was something quieter than both. "I know," he said. He turned and went south. She watched him go until the path curved and took him over the rise and he was gone. Then she turned east, toward the dawn, and she stood for a moment in the heather with the cold air on her face and the light growing, and the pull in her chest that had been south and east for 3 years now simply present, close and constant, like a second heartbeat that was finally beating at the right time. "Now what?" Clara said. "Now we eat something," Mara said, "and then we decide where we are going." Nell said, "I know a place." Everyone looked at her. "What?" she said. "I have been planning escape routes since I was 12. It is a very good place. There is a town 3 days east that is large enough to have a proper market, and small enough that no one asks questions, and I know a woman there who rents rooms and makes excellent soup." Owen said, "I would very much like some soup." Clara said, "The soup is irrelevant, but the town sounds useful." Agnes said, with the dry precision she applied to most things, "I would not say the soup is irrelevant." They started east. The dawn came up gold and cold and very clear, the kind of morning that existed specifically to remind you that the world was much larger than whatever had been happening to you in it, and that the largeness was not threatening but simply true, and that you were moving through it, and that was enough. Mara walked east with the light coming in at a low angle that made everything it touched look like the first time it had been touched. The heather was still brown and gray at this hour but promised other seasons. The path was firm underfoot. The thorn wall was behind them and the mist was below it, and the falls were behind the mist and the seal was closed. She had a name again. That was what she felt most clearly, walking east in the dawn. Not the bond, not the weight of what came next, not the complicated question of what she and Caius were to each other now and what they would become. Those things were real and they would need to be lived with and lived through, and she would do that, one day at a time, as they arrived. What she felt most clearly was simpler. She had her name back. The one her mother had written over and over so it would not be lost, the one she had not said aloud in 3 years. She had said it into the Highland air, and the Highland air had carried it, and it was in the world now, hers, and she was not hiding it. She was walking east in her own name, in the dawn, with 5 people she had gathered in 3 days of running, and the path ahead was unknown in the specific way that paths were unknown, when you were going towards something rather than away from something else. She walked. The town was called Arwick. It sat in a long valley between 2 low hills, the kind of town that had been there long enough that it had grown into the landscape rather than onto it, the buildings settling down into the earth the way old things settled. A river ran through the west side of it, wide and slow at this time of year, and there were 3 market streets and a proper inn and the woman Nell knew, who was called Rose, who did in fact make excellent soup. They arrived 2.5 days after leaving the Highlands. Not 3, as Nell had estimated, because Nell turned out to have a significant underestimation of how fast a group moved when it had sufficient motivation, food, and the particular energy of people who had survived something and were now on the other side of it. Rose gave them 4 rooms over the tavern, looked at each of them in turn with the calm assessment of someone who had rented rooms to many kinds of travelers and developed accurate instincts about all of them, said nothing beyond the price and the meal times, and went back to her kitchen. Mara sat in her room for the first evening and did not do anything. She sat in the chair by the window and she looked at the town below and she breathed, slowly, and she thought about nothing specific, not the bond, not what came next, not the conversations that were going to have to happen and the decisions that were going to have to be made, just the room, and the window, and the town, and her own breathing, and the extraordinary fact of not being in motion. She did not sleep that evening. She had slept in short intervals for the past 3 days and she found that she was, unexpectedly, not tired. She was resting in a way that did not require sleep, a different kind of recovery, the kind that came from not needing to be alert anymore. She sat and watched the town go to sleep below her. Lanterns going out in windows, one by one, the sound of the tavern below, gradually quieting, the river, faint but constant, carrying its slow voice from the west side of town into the general quiet. She took the strip of cloth out of her bag. She read it again. Agnes's translation was still with her, clear and complete. Every word her mother had written, her mother's name, her own name, the names of the Covenant elders who had first built the seal and why they had built it, and what they had hoped it would become. The history that had been compressed into a piece of cloth and carried for 3 years by a girl who could not read it. She folded it and held it in her hands for a moment. Then she put it back, but differently, in the outer pocket of the bag, where she could reach it without digging, where it was accessible rather than hidden. In the morning, she came down to breakfast. The others were already there, in various states of recovery. Owen was eating with the focused determination of a man who had been given a meal and intended to give it his full attention. Clara and Nell were talking in the low, rapid way of people who had a great deal to discuss and had been waiting for a moment of relative safety to discuss it. Nathan had his maps out on the table but was also eating. Agnes had a cup of tea and was looking at the room with the expression she used when she was making calculations. Mara sat down. Rose appeared and put bread and preserves in front of her and a cup of tea beside the bread, and Mara said thank you, and Rose nodded and left. "We need to talk about what happens next," Mara said. "Yes," said Agnes. "Owen," Mara said, "you need to go north and confirm your daughter is where she was going." He looked at her. "Clara is here," he said. "Your other daughter," she said, "the one you were trying to reach before all of this happened." She watched his face. "You have been carrying that concern for 3 days and not saying it. You should go." Owen was quiet for a moment. "I will wait another day," he said. "I want to be sure." "We are sure," Mara said, "or as sure as things are. The seal is closed. The people below the Thornwall do not have what they came for and cannot get it, and they know that. The reason for pursuing us is gone. The danger from that specific direction is," she paused, "significantly reduced." Clara said, to her father, "Go tomorrow. I will be here when you come back." He looked at her. "You are staying?" "For now," she said. She looked at Mara. "If that is acceptable." "Yes," Mara said. Nell said, "I am also staying. I have nowhere to be urgently, and this has been by far the most interesting week of my life, and I would like to see how it continues." Nathan said, from behind his maps, "I have materials here I need to record while the details are fresh. Arwick suits me for another week at least." Agnes said, "I have nowhere else to be. I have been trying to get here for 11 years. I am not in a hurry to leave." Rose, who had returned to refill the tea and had clearly been listening to at least some of this, said, "I have the rooms for a month if you want them." She said it without any particular expression, and left again before anyone could respond. Owen looked around the table. He had the expression of a man who had come looking for a hiding place for his family, and had found himself, somehow, at the center of something considerably larger, and had no idea when that had happened. "Is this—" He stopped. "Are we a group then? A permanent sort of group?" "Not permanent," Mara said. "Nothing is permanent." She looked at the table, at the faces around it, at the tea and the bread and the maps and the morning light coming through the tavern windows. "But for now, yes, for now we are." Owen nodded once, the nod of a man who had found this acceptable. He left the next morning, northeast, toward the place his daughter had been going. He embraced Clara for a long time before he left, and then he embraced Nell, who had been sufficiently in his orbit for 3 days to have apparently become someone worth embracing. And then he shook Nathan's hand and Agnes's hand and looked at Mara and did not know what to do for a moment. She said, "Thank you. For Valehaven and the forest and all of it." He said, "You fixed my roof without being asked." He smiled, briefly. "Or, someone did. Someone like you, before you were you." "I was always me," she said. "I just did not say so." He nodded. He left. She watched him go from the window of her room. She thought about Edith, who had sent him down the road toward the falls with the particular efficiency of a woman who had been quietly moving pieces for longer than anyone knew. She thought about Leonard and his oven that hummed. She thought about Pip, who was braver than his sister. She thought about all the places she had been in 3 years, the settlements and roads and borrowed names and rented rooms, and she thought that all of those places had in some way been practice for being somewhere real. She was somewhere real now. She did not know yet what to do with that, and she was allowing herself to not know, which was itself new. In the days that followed, the group found its shape in the way that small groups found shapes, by the specific gravity of each person's nature pulling them toward the work they were actually suited for, without anyone assigning it. Nathan mapped. He worked at a table in the tavern's back room, which Rose had made available without being asked, and he produced careful, detailed records of the Thornwall crossings, the falls, the mist zone, the highland paths. He said, when Mara asked what he intended to do with them, "Put them somewhere they can be found by the people who need them. Not all at once, distributed, so that no single source can be controlled or suppressed." Clara read. She had found, in Arwick's small but decent lending library, 3 texts that referenced the Covenant in different ways, none of them complete, all of them useful. She was building a picture of what the Covenant had been before the war, which she said was important information to have, because understanding what was lost made it possible to understand what needed to be rebuilt. Nell organized. This had not been assigned to her. She simply began doing it, and it turned out that she was excellent at it, at the logistics of who needed what information, and how to get it to them, and what sequence of events was most likely to produce useful outcomes. Rose observed her doing this for 2 days, and then, without comment, began to bring Nell extra paper. Agnes rested. Mara had not expected this, and it took her several days to understand what she was seeing. Agnes sat by the tavern window or in the small garden behind the building, and she did not do very much at all. She drank tea. She watched the river. She sometimes spoke with Mara in the evenings, conversations that were not about the seal or the bond or the blight, but about other things. Her life before the Covenant, the places she had traveled after, the particular quality of having spent 11 years in motion toward a single point, and now having arrived at it. "What do you do now?" Mara asked her, one evening in the garden. Agnes considered. "I do not know," she said. "I have been moving toward this for a very long time. I had not made plans for after, because making plans for after felt presumptuous, like assuming it would happen in a way that permitted an after." She looked at the river, visible beyond the garden wall. "I believe I will rest for a while longer, and then I will decide." "I will be here," Mara said. Agnes looked at her. Something in the old woman's face moved, briefly, before it settled. "Yes," she said, "I know." The letter came 8 days after they arrived in Arwick. It was brought by a kingdom rider who came into town at mid-morning on a gray day, asking at the inn for someone named Mara. He found her in the back room where Nathan worked, and he handed her a sealed letter and said he had been told it was urgent, and then he left, because he had other letters to deliver and a long road ahead of him. She looked at the seal on the letter for a moment. It was not the king's official seal. That was a formal thing, embossed in wax and impressive. This was a different mark, simpler, a shape she did not immediately know. She opened it. The letter was short. It said, "The council members responsible for what happened at the falls have been removed from their positions. The full account of their activities has been given to the official record, which means it is now public. They are currently the subject of a formal inquiry which I am told will be thorough. I was told by a reliable source that you would want to know this quickly." The reliable source was a woman named Agnes, who apparently sent a message 2 days before you arrived in Arwick. I am not sure how she knew where you would be. I am learning to stop questioning things Agnes knows. It also said, near the bottom of the page, in the same direct way he said everything, "The blight on the eastern border has stopped advancing. The healers are reporting stability in 3 settlements that were in decline last month. I am told full recovery is slow, and I have been told to be patient, which I am told is not my strongest quality. I am trying." The letter did not say anything about them, nothing about the bond or what came next or the question that was sitting somewhere in the space between where she was and where he was. She had said she knew where to find him, and she did, and he had said he would be where he was when she was ready, and she had felt that he meant it, and the letter was consistent with that. Presence without pressure, information without demand. She put the letter down on Nathan's table. Nathan had stopped mapping and was looking at her with the expression of someone trying to determine whether this was the kind of information that belonged to her privately or the kind that should be shared. "The council members responsible for the falls situation have been removed," she said. "The blight is stable." Nathan nodded and went back to his maps. She went to find the others. Clara and Nell were in the library. She told them. Clara received the information with characteristic efficiency and said, "What do you want to do about the Covenant records?" And Mara said, "What do you mean?" And Clara said, "The Covenant had records. Most of them were destroyed in the war, but not all. Agnes has memories of some of them, and I have found references in 3 texts here to specific documents that might still exist in private collections or church archives. If the Covenant is going to be understood accurately, if people are going to know what it was and what it did and why, someone needs to find those records and put them somewhere that is not controlled by anyone with an interest in the story being told a particular way." Mara looked at her. "Is this something you want to do?" Mara said. "Yes," Clara said, with the directness that had characterized everything she had said since the first moment in the cave. "It is work that needs doing, and I am good at finding things, and Nathan is good at documenting them, and Nell is good at organizing information, and we have the motivation and the access. Agnes knows which records existed. You have the bloodline's institutional memory, which means you may have knowledge you have not yet fully accessed." She paused, "And it is not running away from anything." Mara looked at her for a moment longer. "No," she said, "it is not. So you will help?" "Yes," Mara said. She did not feel the word as a commitment made under pressure. She felt it as something she was choosing because she wanted to, which was exactly what Agnes had said the seal required, and what Mara now understood applied to more than the seal, to everything, if you were going to be actually alive in a life rather than just surviving it. She chose. She wrote back to Caius that afternoon. The letter was longer than his, because she had more to say, and she said it directly in the way she had learned to say things that needed to be said. She told him about Arwick and the group and what Clara had proposed. She told him that she was staying in Arwick for now and would be traveling from it when there were records to find. She told him that the pull she had felt every day for 3 years was different now. Not gone, never gone, but not the ache of absence anymore, which was a different thing, quieter and more sustainable, like a compass needle that had found north and was resting there rather than straining toward it. She told him that she would be in contact, that when the time was right for the conversations they had not yet had, she would be the one to start them, and she asked him to trust that, which she knew was asking something of him, and she said she understood it was asking something. She signed the letter with her real name, her mother's name for her, the one written over and over on the strip of cloth, the one she had not said aloud for 3 years, and had said into the Highland air and now put in ink, for someone else to read, her name in her own handwriting. She sent it with the next rider out of Arwick. Then she went back to the table where Clara and Nell were working, and she sat down, and she looked at the list of documents they had begun to compile, and she started to read. The days had a different quality now. Not easier, exactly. Nothing fundamental about the world had changed. The blight had stopped spreading, but it had not repaired itself overnight, and the records they were trying to find were genuinely hard to locate, and the political situation Caius was navigating was complicated in ways that trickled through in his letters, which came every 2 weeks with the rider service, and which she read carefully and replied to at length. Nothing was simple. But the days were hers. She filled them with work she had chosen, and people she had gathered, and a room in a town she had not fled. She learned things. She ate Rose's soup, which was in fact excellent, and Agnes was correct that this was not irrelevant. She walked along the river on the mornings when she needed to think, and the river did not ask anything of her, and she appreciated that about rivers. She stopped counting the days until the next event that might require her to leave. She had been doing that for 3 years, the constant background arithmetic of safety margins and exit strategies and how long until the next thing that made staying impossible. It had been so consistent that she had stopped noticing it, the way you stopped noticing a sound that was always present. It took her several days after Arwick before she noticed it was gone. She stood in the garden behind the tavern one afternoon, about 2 weeks in, and she noticed that she was simply standing in a garden, not watching the exits, not calculating anything, just standing in the cold air with the sound of the river nearby and the last of the autumn birds in the bare trees, and her feet on the ground, and her name in her own mouth. She said it, out loud, in the empty garden. It did not echo. It did not announce itself. It was just her name in her own voice, said to no one, heard by no one, and it sat in the air for a moment, and then dissolved the way all sounds did, leaving only the evidence that it had been there. That was enough. More than enough. It was the kind of enough that did not need to be called anything, that simply was, in the way that the best things were simply themselves without needing explanation. She went back inside. Nell had found a reference to a Covenant archive that might be in a church in a town 3 days west. Clara had written a letter of inquiry that was waiting for Mara's review. Nathan had a map of the West Road ready. Agnes had information about what might be in the archive if it existed. "Tomorrow?" Clara said when Mara came in. Mara looked at the map. She looked at the letter. She looked at the faces around the table. Clara's focused readiness, Nell's organized calm, Nathan's quiet competence, Agnes's 11 years of patience resting easy at last. She looked at the work on the table. "Tomorrow," she said. And they went to work. The autumn moved into its later weeks, and the road west was cold and clear, and the town with the church had the archive or most of it, and the archive had things in it that none of them had expected and all of them needed. The Covenant story was not what the war had made it into, and the records were the evidence of that, and the records needed to be read and documented and placed somewhere that was not subject to any single interest's control. They did that work. They came back to Arwick and they did more work from there, and letters moved back and forth between Arwick and the kingdom, and the spring was different on the eastern border than anyone had seen in 3 years. The settlements that had been hollowing out beginning to have a quality of life returning to them, slow and tentative but unmistakable. She sent Caius a letter when the first report came in about the eastern border. The letter said, "It is working." His reply came 2 weeks later. It said, "Yes." It said something else too, something longer, something careful and honest and direct in the specific way he was direct, which she had come to recognize, and which she trusted, not because she had decided to trust it, but because it had demonstrated itself to be trustworthy in the consistent way that things demonstrated themselves over time. She read the letter twice. She put it in the pocket of her coat, not in the bag. She went and found Agnes in the garden. Agnes looked at her when she came through the door, and something in Agnes's expression shifted with the quality of a person who had been waiting to see a particular expression on a particular face, and had just seen it. "When?" Agnes asked. Mara sat down in the other garden chair. "Spring," she said. "There is more to do here first, but spring." Agnes looked at the bare garden. "That is a good season for arriving somewhere new," she said. "I know," Mara said. "I have done it before." "Not like this," Agnes said. "No," she agreed. "Not like this." Agnes reached across and briefly covered Mara's hand with her own. The specific touch of someone who had very few gestures, and therefore each one meant more than it might otherwise mean. She withdrew it after a moment and went back to her tea. They sat in the garden together in the quiet afternoon. The river went on at the edge of hearing. The town moved around them, its ordinary life continuing in all the ways ordinary life continued. The bakers' ovens, the children in the streets, the particular rhythm of a place that had no idea it was adjacent to anything significant, and simply went on being itself with complete confidence. Mara sat in it. Not hiding in it, not waiting it out, sitting in it because she was here, and this was where she was, and this was her life. The one she was building deliberately from the pieces she had gathered on 3 years of running, and 3 days of choosing. The pull in her chest had been a compass for 3 years. It had pointed her toward something she was running from. Now it pointed toward something she was moving toward, and the difference between those two movements was the difference between a life lived in subtraction and a life lived in accumulation. She was accumulating. She had a name and people and work and a room and a garden and a road west that led to archives and a road south that led to the spring. She had a name. She had her name. She let herself have it, completely, without qualification, the way you held something that was fully yours, not carefully, not protecting it against loss, but openly, the way you held sunlight. The afternoon went on. She stayed in it.